Thank you, Madam President. Councilor Arroyo.
Present.
Councilor Baker.
Here.
Councilor Bach.
Present.
Councilor Braden.
Present.
Councilor Campbell. Councilor Edwards.
Present.
Councilor Sabi.
Present.
Councilor Flaherty.
Here.
Councilor Flynn.
Here.
Councilor Janey.
Present.
Councilor Mejia.
Here.
Councilor O'Malley.
Present.
Councilor Wu.
Present.
And Councilor Campbell. She's not on yet, but we do have a quorum, Madam President.
Thank you so much. I've been informed by our clerk that we have a quorum, so we will begin our meeting as we usually do with clergy. We're grateful to have a rabbi with us, and to introduce her will be Councilor Bach. Councilor Bach, you have the floor. After the invocation, we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilor Bach.
Thank you so much, Madam President. It's my honor today to introduce Rabbi Elaine Zecher, the senior rabbi of Temple Israel, which is the largest Jewish congregation in New England and also in District 8. Rabbi Zecher is the first woman to lead that community, and she's also a leader in the National Jewish Reform Movement, and someone I learned who's actually developed a number of prayers and prayer books, so we're especially lucky to have her providing our benediction today. On a personal note, I think it's come up before that while I was raised Christian, I was raised with Jewish godparents who were members at Temple Israel. And so I do think of it as my temple. I've been there dozens of times for personal reasons, and more recently with the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization for various gatherings that have pushed for social justice. And counselors know at the last meeting, I had a priest from my church, Trinity, here. And in 2013, after the marathon bombings, when Trinity was still inside the cordon and we couldn't celebrate on Sunday, Temple Israel actually, in an incredible act of generosity, opened their sanctuary to us to hold our Sunday service. And so I think of that institution as such a model of what it means to live an interfaith community together here in the city of Boston. So really honored to have the rabbi here with us today.
Thank you, and I'm so honored and glad to be present again in these chambers when we are in our boxes, and yet what a prayer reminds us is that we are all interconnected, and even in this austere group, even if you reach out, and I'm going to ask you to reach out beyond your box. Go ahead, reach out beyond your box, and you're going to see how we actually are all connected to one another, even though there might seem that something is separating all of us. And I turned to the psalmists, and they were the ones who really the first ones who really thought about what is prayer and how do we express prayer. And they recognize that our whole bodies, here we are, our whole bodies can express gratitude and praise God. And in the 15th Psalm asks, okay, you can put your hands down now, it's hard. Okay, but you get the idea. In the 15th Psalm, the psalmist says, who gets to be sacred? Who gets to be with the divine? And gives the qualification of 3 different characteristics. And that is one who walks with integrity, holech tamim, one who engages actively, is doing justice, poel tzedek, and one who speaks the truth of one's heart, dover emet bilvavo. And so as you gather on this day, and as you are leaders of this community and this wonderful city, we ask God to give God's grace to you, the integrity, the action of justice, and the truthfulness of your words and your heart. For when all of that happens, that is what connects us to the divine, and that is what is sacred. So that all of our being, in all that we do, not just in words of prayer, but through integrity, through justice, and through truth, brings the ultimate blessing the blessing of the presence and the strength of the sacred in our souls. And so our prayer today is that the blessing of integrity, of justice, and truth moves with us and through us and brings great divinity and sacredness to our wonderful city and everything that you do. And we say, Amen.
We're now going to pledge allegiance to the flag. If you would join us, Rabbi.
And sacredness to our wonderful city and everything that you do. And we say, Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. We're now going to pledge allegiance to the flag.
for which it
Join us,
stands,
Rabbi.
Nation.
And sacredness to our wonderful city and everything that you do. And we say, Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America. And to the republic for which it
for
stands.
which it stands, one nation,
nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty,
with liberty and justice
You do.
for all.
And we say, Amen.
I pledge allegiance. I just want to check in, Carrie. We seem to have a little echo there. Are we good? Is everything good on the sound side?
Yeah, we should be all set.
Okay, it was playing back on my screen. I don't know if that was the same for others.
It was.
Delayed echo, where while we were pledging allegiance to the flag, we were still hearing the prayer. So we're all set now? Wonderful, wonderful. Have we been joined by Campbell? Not yet. Okay. Well, I wanted to thank you, Rabbi, and certainly you're welcome to stay if you'd like, but you are also free to go. We certainly appreciate those words and that exercise of how connected we all are. I know as we're coming back from the holiday weekend, hopefully some of us were able to get some rest, and certainly is a time for reflection as we celebrate the founding of our country. And this is the first council meeting since our budget vote 2 weeks ago. So I just wanted to share a few thoughts. And I know there was a lot of public interest and engagement in the final weeks of our budget process. And so I'll just start by saying thank you to all those who took time to participate in our many budget hearings. But I also wanted to take time to thank our central staff, everyone on central staff, but especially Michelle Goldberg and Shane Pack. They've done incredible work over the past several months, and I wanted to thank them publicly. In addition, I am thrilled to share that our very own Shane Pack will officially step into the role of Senior Legislative Assistant and Budget Analyst. This promotion is well-deserved, yes, and it is always good to recognize our team members where they can grow. So let's all please show our appreciation to Shane and congratulate him on the promotion. Thank you. Yes, indeed. So that is very well deserved, and I'm really glad that we can allow for our team members to grow within the organization. So congratulations, Shane. The other thing that I just wanted to say about the budget is that our focus on racial equity and economic justice goes far beyond a single vote on the budget. And I believe that since we all want to see structural change and address systemic racism, that the protest and the community must be coupled with policy from the council. And so as president of the most diverse city council in Boston's history, I know I can speak confidently when I say that this body remains committed to doing the work long after the budget vote, so that we will continue to fight for just and equitable Boston for all residents. And I'm truly grateful that I get to do this work with all of you. So with that said, let's get to work. We will go follow our agenda, and the first order of business is the approval of the minutes. If there are no corrections to be made, the minutes of the last meeting will stand as approved. Seeing and hearing no objections, the minutes of the last meeting are so approved. We'll now move on to communications from His Honor the Mayor. Madam Clerk, could you start by reading docket 0831, please?
Thank you, Madam President. Docket 0831, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and extend an amount of $120,000 in the form of a grant for the Harrison Albany Block Public Benefit Fund awarded by the Boston Redevelopment Authority to be administered by the Boston Police Department. The grant will fund the purchase and installation of cameras at O'Day Park, Blackstone Square, Franklin Square, in the South End, under cooperation agreements between MEPT/LMP, Gambrock LLC, and the Boston Redevelopment Authority.
Thank you. Docket 0831 will be referred to the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice. Could you please read docket 0832?
Thank you. Docket 0832, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend an amount of $40,000 in the form of a grant for the Art Lab Cooperative Agreement awarded by the Harvard University Office of General Counsel, administered by the Office of Arts and Culture. The grant will fund the remaining amount of $10,000 per year for 5 years to the Boston Cultural Council Opportunity Fund for the benefit of the Austin Brighton Community Art Lab grant will support career development for all.
Madam President, we've lost contact.
Yes. Madam Clerk?
Right, someone keeps muting me. I don't know who keeps muting me, but it's happening. I have no idea why.
Have you finished reading the docket?
Yes, but would you like me to read it again?
Just maybe that last sentence I think you cut off.
Sentence. The grant will fund the remaining amount of $10,000 per year for 5 years to the Boston Cultural Opportunity Fund for the benefit of the Austin Brighton Community Art Lab grant. Will support career development of Austin Brighton artists and free community arts experiences to Austin Brighton residents.
Thank you so much, Madam Clerk. The chair recognizes Councilor Baker. Councilor Baker, you have the floor.
I would like to make a motion to suspend and pass docket 0832. It's $10,000 a year over 4 years, short money, and it will benefit, I'm sure Councilor Braden is on board with this one here, benefit directly Austin Brighton artists and the community residents. So I'd like to suspend and pass 0832.
Thank you so much. Councilor Baker seeks suspension of the rules and passage of docket 0832. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. The ayes have it, and docket 0832 has been passed. Before we move on, I think we've been joined by Councilor Campbell. Madam Clerk, could you please update the attendance to reflect that Councilor Campbell has joined us?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. We will now move on to reports of public officers and others. Madam Clerk, if you could read a docket 0833 through 0835. We'll read those together.
Thank you, Madam President. Docket 0833, notice is received from the Mayor of the appointment of Mark McDonald as the Deputy City Auditor, effective May 30th, 2020. Docket number 0834, notice is received from the Mayor of the appointment of John Dempsey as Commissioner of the Boston Fire Department, effective April 13th, 2020. And docket number 0835, communication was received from Tim Davis, Deputy Director of Policy Development and Research Division, regarding the submissions of the report on the ordinance allowing short-term residential rentals in the city of Boston.
Thank you so much. Docket 0833 through 0835 will be placed on file. We'll now go on to docket 0836, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Docket 0836, the constable bonds of Ron Cobb, Helen Borgella, Ega Brown, William Joyce, Norman Lowe, Arthur Montgomery, and Anselm Nowakwo have been duly approved by the collector treasurer were received.
Thank you. Docket 0836 will be referred to the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice. We will now move on to motions, orders, and resolutions, and we'll start with docket 0837.
Thank you. Docket 0837, Councilors Flynn and Asabi George offer the following resolution celebrating American with Disabilities Act, ADA, 30th anniversary in July.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Flynn. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you to Councilor Asabi George for partnering with me on this as well. This year is the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, signed into law in 1990. It's an important piece of federal legislation. It prohibits discrimination against persons with disabilities in areas such as jobs, schools, public spaces. It also guarantees that persons with disabilities are entitled to the same rights as those without disabilities, and provides construction standards on building accessibility. In the city, we work to support our persons with disabilities also. The Disabilities Commission works with individuals with disabilities to ensure that they have full and equal participation in all aspects of life, as well as work to address ADA compliance and accessibility improvements in City Hall. We have an exceptional mayor's office on Commission with Disabilities. They do a tremendous job in this city under the leadership of Commissioner McCosh. The Office of Language and Communication Access also works to ensure that all city departments have translation and interpretation services for non-English speaking residents and residents with disabilities as well. On the 30th anniversary of the passage of ADA, it is important that we, again, affirm that persons with disabilities deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. I hope that we can suspend and pass this resolution today. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much, Councilor Flynn. The chair recognizes Councilor Asabi George. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to Councilor Flynn for including me on this resolution. Passing the ADA 30 years ago marked the beginning of our society's efforts to rethink what it means to be a person with a disability and what it means to live in a world that was not built with them in mind. I am particularly concerned with the barriers our students with disabilities have when trying to access education that supports and celebrates them. I've filed hearing orders on inclusion and dyslexia services and BPS. I'm also concerned about our autistic students as well as the quality of our special education supports across the board for our students with IEPs and 504s. This anniversary is a reminder that we still have so much more work to do to make public education in particular in our city more accessible for all, truly accessible for all. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Councilor Flynn.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Flaherty, you have the floor. You're still on mute, Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam President. Please add my name, and appreciate the work of the sponsors. I know that Councilor Flynn and I have done a lot of work dating back to St. Coletta's, to St. Simon of Cyrene, around Best Buddies. So very timely, and appreciate the work that we've done as a body and as a city in the space. So appreciate it, and I look forward to getting this adopted today.
Thank you so much. Anyone else looking to add their name, show of physical hands, please. Madam Clerk, if you could please add Councilor Braden, Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Campbell, Councilor Edwards, Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Flaherty, Councilor Wu, Councilor Mejia, Councilor Baker, Councilor Bach, the chair. Did I get everyone? I think I got everyone. The boxes were moving. And the chair. Thank you so much. Councilors Flynn and Councilor Asabi George seek suspension of the rules and adoption of docket 0837. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Docket 0837 has been adopted. Madam Clerk, could you read docket 0838?
Docket 0838, Councilors Campbell and Edwards offer the following resolution, urging state legislature and Governor Baker to extend the eviction moratorium.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Campbell. Councilor Campbell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to suspend Rule 12 and add Councilor Bach as an original co-sponsor.
Seeing and hearing no objections, Councilor Bach has been added.
Thank you, Madam President, and of course, thank you to my co-sponsors, Councilors Edwards and Councilors Edwards and Bach, for your partnership and your leadership with respect to housing issues. Stable and affordable housing is a critical piece of healthy, safe communities, especially while we're in the midst of a public health crisis, and we must treat it as essential. The statewide eviction moratorium, which was passed on April 20th, has helped thousands of people stay in their homes while facing serious economic hardship due to job loss, health issues, and hospital bills, and so much more. The state's moratorium is stopping most evictions. The state's moratorium stopping most evictions will last until August 18th or until 45 days after the governor lifts the state of emergency, whichever comes first. A study from MAPC projects that at this time, roughly 120,000 households are at risk of being unable to make their housing payments. Furthermore, a report just recently from City Life Vida Urbana and researchers at the at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, suggest that these evictions are likely to disproportionately affect, of course, communities of color, and particularly Black communities. Between March 1st and April 20th, the weeks in which the COVID-19 virus was spreading in Massachusetts and before the eviction moratorium was signed, 78% of all evictions filed in Boston were in census tracts where the majority of residents are people of color. Many of those residents of Mattapan, Dorchester, Roxbury, and Hyde Park, where eviction filing rates are the highest, are already living closer to poverty with lower median incomes than the city as a whole and less accumulated wealth. At the city level, we have a rental relief program that works, of course, with tenants and landlords to make up the rents tenants can't pay, but that works on a case-by-case basis. So I'm hoping all of my colleagues will sign on to this resolution. I also want to thank Representatives Mike Connolly and Kevin Honan for Bill H4624, which also extends the moratorium. And I hope all my colleagues will support this. It's extremely pressing. I think you all understand the magnitude of this issue and how communities of color, particularly residents and low-income workers, are suffering right now. So this is something quite simple that we can do to support them. Thank you again to Councilors Edwards and Bach for your partnership. Thank you, Madam President. Oh, ask the suspension of the rules and passage.
Thank you so much, Councilor Campbell. The chair recognizes Councilor Edwards.
Thank you very much. I want to first thank the maker, the originator, Councilor Campbell, for her vision and also inviting me to be one of the co-sponsors. I appreciate that, and also wanted to just add a couple things to this request of Councilor Campbell. The fact is, we are going to face an eviction tsunami, is the word that people are using, when this current eviction moratorium is up. We cannot, as legislators, as policymakers, sit back and do nothing. We have to do something. This is all on us at this moment. We did not control, nor did we create COVID, but how we respond to this particular crisis should speak to our hearts, our political will, and our moral compass. The fact is, I say this as a landlord, right? I say this as a landlord, this eviction moratorium needs to continue. It needs to continue, and why I specifically support the legislation from Representative Honan and Representative Connolly is because it is a balanced approach. It actually creates a fund for small landlords. It allows for people having up to 15 units to tap into that fund. And by tapping into that fund, you will commit not to raise your rents or evict these individuals in your property. It is balanced. It looks at long-term impacts financially on landlords as well as tenants. The fact is, we are in this together. All of us, in some way, shape, or form, owe more money. As landlords, property owners to the banks, as tenants to the landlords, we should be seeing this as a moment for us to come together to hold institutions that hold all of our debts more accountable, instead of as a moment to fight against each other. The fact is, there are good, hardworking people who are unable to pay rent due to COVID. Yes, there are some bad actors who have misinterpreted this law and misinterpreted the point of this to say, I don't have to pay rent. No one has said you do not have to pay rent if you can pay it. Most people have said you should not be evicted if, due to COVID, you cannot pay your rent. And I stand firmly by that. The fact of the matter is we are dealing with an eviction tsunami before COVID, with a million people already having eviction records in Massachusetts before COVID. We have no one to blame but ourselves as policymakers if we allow this moratorium to expire and for us to look at and wonder what's going on in our neighborhoods. I personally think that we should be doing everything we can to extend it, and also provide the financial relief to landlords, small landlords especially, to make sure that they can also continue to be homeowners. So I stand firmly and I'm excited. I hope that we can get this done at the State House. And I just want to thank Councilor Campbell for her leadership.
Thank you so much, Councilor Edwards. The chair recognizes Councilor Bach. Councilor Bach, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. And I also want to add my thanks to Councilor Campbell for originating this and Councilor Edwards for her leadership on this issue. Both my colleagues have said so much already. I want to underline, picking up on the tsunami point that Councilor Edwards was making, that we're worrying right now about a second wave of COVID. And there is there's a fundamental sort of natural component of that, right? There are things about disease that we cannot control, although we are trying to mitigate them as best as possible. But when we talk about an eviction wave, I just think we have to recognize that that's within a system that we have built. Like it's within our structure. The state, by which the government is involved in every stage of eviction, from housing court where people still don't have representation, to the sheriffs who show up to get people out on the street. And I just think we really have to recognize that evictions aren't a thing that happens like disease transmission. They're a thing that like we, our society, do. And it's not something that it's frankly not something that we should be doing in all but the most rare and well-justified cases in normal times. But in a public health crisis, it's unconscionable. And it's the opposite of how we need to use our resources. I mean, we have spent the last months trying to figure out how you marshal public resources to get people into housing. We can't begin to contemplate using public resources to kick people out of housing. And I also think it's just really important to underscore that we talk a lot about the racial wealth gap and the sort of historical sources of that around redlining. But one of the biggest ways to deepen and continue the racial wealth gap in this time is through evictions and foreclosures in a situation like this. Foreclosures because people lose ownership wealth, but evictions tend to lead to loss of people's personal property, loss of jobs, just a long, long road back, and a real setting back of anybody who is building up some modest holdings. And so I just think that it's incumbent upon us. It's incumbent upon us to pass this today. It's incumbent upon us to pass, Representative Connolly and Honen's bill. But their bill structurally, I think, does a lot of important things that go beyond a mere moratorium. But the reason I'm so glad to be co-sponsoring this with Councilor Campbell, calling for an extension to the moratorium now, is that we've got people who are sitting in fear and worry right now with that August 18th deadline. And frankly, I expect the wrangling up at the State House about the larger bill and the sort of bigger structural fix to this to be something that happens now over a series of weeks. We should at least give those people the assurance of an extended moratorium as we continue to have that conversation about how we lay deeper protections permanently. So I think that's an action, and it's an action that the governor could take today. And that's why it's important for us as a body to use our voice to say, extend the moratorium, and then also let's pass this bill. So thank you so much, Madam President.
Thank you so much. Show of hands for anyone who wants to add their name. Madam Clerk, if you could please add Councilor Flynn, Councilor Braden, Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Asabi George, Councilor Mejia, Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Wu, Councilor Flaherty, and please also add the chair. Councilors Campbell, Edwards, and Bach seek suspension of the rules and adoption of docket 0838. All those in favor say aye.
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 The ayes have it. Docket 0838 has been adopted. Madam Clerk, could you please read docket 0839?
Thank you. Docket 0839, Councilors Bach and Campbell offered the following order for hearing regarding police overtime.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The chair recognizes Councilor Bach.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I request permission to suspend Rule 12 and add Councilor Matt O'Malley as an original co-sponsor on this.
Thank you. Secretary, no objections. Councilor O'Malley is permitted. Councilor Bach.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm glad to be joined today with Councilor Campbell, who's the chair of Public Safety, because this really is, the question of making these overtime savings real is a ways and means question because it's about our budget, and it's only we're only able to shift those resources permanently into other things if we make the overtime cuts real. But it is also obviously a set of questions about how we police in the city and about public safety. So I'm really glad to have Councilor Campbell, who's been such a leader for so long on these issues, co-sponsoring with me today. As everyone knows, a $12 million reduction to the city's police overtime budget was included in the mayor's resubmitted budget that we voted on and approved on June 24th. And the reality is that that is a line item in the budget that is allowed legally to run over for public safety reasons. And we're looking at several years of history in which our overtime budgets have run over. And as I've said previously, I expect that we will find out soon officially that we had a significant overrun in last year's overtime budget, perhaps to the tune of about $8 million or so. So for us, so that's a challenge, but it also presents an opportunity because it means that if we could actually hold the line on this year's police overtime budget to the amount that the administration has budgeted, we could potentially save as much as $20 million, right, instead of just the 12. But for us to do that, the city needs to have a plan, and that plan needs to be intensely monitored. And so I'm calling for a hearing today for us to hear from the administration about what their plan is, and really push them on not just, there's a piece of this that we might be able to get through the fact that there are COVID large events canceled. But when we looked at the overall distribution of overtime in our budget, the special events overtime is not enough to make this kind of a savings. So we need to be looking at structurally, how do we assign overtime and what are the things that we're doing with our overtime, and are some of those things that actually our communities are asking us to do less of anyways. I think of the FIO data that came out recently. And then there are questions about active management and how you really stay on top of where you're using extensive overtime. And there's a bunch of tools that were used in the Menino era when they tried to bring this number down and succeeded. And so we really need to know that both the police department and the Office of Administration and Finance have a very proactive plan for handling the overtime overages. And it's just, we can't accept the status quo of running over. Next year's budget is going to be hard. We're going to be looking at declining revenues, and every dollar that we run over for this overtime is dollars that we can't move into the other critical priorities of the city, and specifically the kind of investments in community care and community solutions to public safety that we've all been talking about and so many advocates have been talking about. So I see this as the continuing work of the budget. Our president talked about the fact that nothing's over after a vote, and it's definitely continuing today. And our plan will be to hold this hearing, to solicit a plan, and then to hold quarterly hearings all year to track where we are on the overtime budget so that we are not surprised next spring or summer by where we've ended up. So so I look forward to holding this hearing in the very near future. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much, Councilor Bach. The chair recognizes Councilor Campbell. Councilor Campbell, you're still muted.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you, Councilor Bach, of course, for the partnership and your leadership with the Ways and Means Committee. I look forward to not only this hearing, but also the quarterly hearings and updates, consistent updates that we can provide to the public on this critical issue. I think it's become abundantly clear through the advocacy of residents and activists, of course, that reducing the police overtime budget is the most obvious place to start when we're talking about reallocating money away from policing and towards services and investments and programs that absolutely address, and we know this, root causes of public safety issues we face, which are often linked, of course, to poverty, inequities, and access to good housing, schools, healthcare, including mental health services and trauma. While I would have liked to see a greater reallocation of these dollars in the FY21 budget, the mayor's budget makes the commitment to reduce the police overtime budget by 12 million to go towards other departments. I think there absolutely needs to continue to be a public conversation with respect to that. So really excited again to partner on this hearing order with you. This hearing order, of course, is about actualizing that commitment, since in previous years, as you so eloquently discussed, the overtime budget has only gone up despite commitments to decrease it. Together with our police department, our unions, and others, I think we can make real changes here. We have to also talk about the provisions within the collective bargaining agreement. I know we're going to talk about that hearing order next, but starting with looking at the 4-hour minimum, the cost with respect to details, and possibly the exorbitant costs there related to some things that we were unaware of maybe at some point were happening in terms of double dipping or some things that are very concerning. I see reallocating 12 million from the police overtime as a bare minimum shift in resources that we can start with this year. But I do think, and you said this as well, we need to make structural changes now to ensure we can continue to reduce these exorbitant overtime costs over the next several years and reinvest these resources in other efforts to improve public safety, public health, and systemic inequities in communities in the city, but also communities of color. Thank you for the partnership, and thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor O'Malley. Councilor O'Malley, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you again to my dear colleagues and friends, the district councilors from Beacon Hill and Mattapan, the chairwomen of the Committee on Ways and Means, as well as Public Safety and Criminal Justice for their leadership and partnership. Across the country and in Boston, advocates are calling for transparency, accountability, and justice in our public safety and criminal justice system. Throughout the budget process, which we just concluded, we've had an important conversation on the distribution of public funds, as we have a conversation about reimagining what public safety looks like in our city. Now, structural changes here include a review, assessment, and council oversight of the Boston Police Department's overtime budget. In his resubmittal, as has been said, Mayor Walsh committed to reallocating 20% of the police overtime spending in the FY21 budget, and that was an important starting point. But we will need to also discuss the long-term implementation of this reallocation for future fiscal years. Now, it's important to recognize that the mechanisms currently in place, which have contributed to an 84% increase of the overtime budget since I was first elected to this body, and many of these mechanisms are dictated by state law or city policy or some things in the collective bargaining agreement. But as we talk about strategies for reform, it's important to have these conversations and, more importantly, to have these opportunities for check-ins throughout the course of the year, as the chair is suggesting today. We can also talk about addressing the ability right now to overspend what the allocation is, removing policies that would encourage the use of overtime as a normal rather than an unusual practice, minimums as it relates to overtime, as well as looking at readiness crisis, looking at limiting the hours less than the current 90 per week to make sure that our officers are able to do their jobs. While this council does not have a literal seat at this table, we're able to push for better and much needed structural reforms through these discussions and ultimately our work in the weeks, months ahead. Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you to the two co-sponsors for their leadership, and looking forward to getting to work.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. The chair recognizes Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Flaherty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Please add my name. These hearings are opportunities for us to learn about the strategic plans to reduce overtime costs, as well as opportunities to collaborate with a variety of stakeholders, including the police, the administration, members of the public, and subject matter experts. I would also suggest to all of my colleagues, particularly our newest members, to take advantage of the opportunity to do a ride along with our police officers, just to get a real sense as to sort of what their day and what their shift is like. And and also particularly for district councilors to get the trip sheets, get those 911 calls that come in and and compile them month to month to get a real sense as to what type, if at all, we could redirect funding, whether it's on the substance abuse side of the house, whether it's on the mental health side of the house. But
Councilor Flaherty, for some reason you're muted. Could you unmute yourself?
yes, I had my scanner on this weekend. Complete chaos in some of our neighborhoods with close to half a dozen homicides, 13 non-fatal shootings, 10 non-fatal stabbings, and it was call after call after call after call. And so don't envy the position that they're in the situations that they get thrust into, but just want to make sure that we're going into this with our eyes open, that clearly there are some issues that need to be addressed to control overtime costs. There's got to be a better collaboration, particularly on the mental health and the substance abuse side, to eliminate situations that our offices are finding themselves in. But the facts are what they are, which is those 911 calls continue to come in. The men and women of our police department are asked to handle those calls. And so I think a good start from this body would be each one of us does a ride along or two or three, and also get those trip sheets every month and start to kind of get our heads and hands around the volume of calls that come in, and more importantly, the nature of those calls, because we're getting conflicting reports. We get some folks in organizations and advocacy groups that don't want 911 call responses and to defund, and then we hear from residents across the city, and I speak as a citywide councilor. I hear from a lot of folks that want police presence and they will continue to call 911. So I need to make sure that we're bridging the difference between those that don't want police and they want to defund the police, and those residents that want police and they want that safety and that protection from them. So, and again, I think it starts with us as a legislative body. It starts with us understanding exactly the types of calls that come in, and also the type of job that the men and women of our police department are doing, so that we're going into this with our eyes wide open as we talk about trying to find ways to reduce overtime costs. Thank you, and please add my name.
Thank you so much, Councilor Flaherty. The chair recognizes Councilor Mejia. Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam President. Good to see you. Thank you to the makers, Councilor Bach and Campbell, for introducing this hearing order. During our budget season this year, we heard from literally thousands of people about the urgent need to cut police spending, particularly as it relates to overtime. One of the things that our office learned and tried hard to communicate to people is that the cut in overtime spending doesn't really mean a cut in the actual use of overtime. In fact, if the Boston Police Department needs more overtime funding, then we budgeted it, we would still have to pay for it. So what we really need to be mindful about is how we're finding ways to actually reduce police use of overtime. I hope this hearing will be a time for us to learn more about overtime, how it's used, for how long, and why it's used in the first place. I look forward to learning and being an active participant in this hearing, and would like to thank Councilors Bach and Campbell for bringing this forward. I just wanted to say two things that made me think about after hearing Councilor Flaherty, is that I was at I think it was a Mass Nurses Association rally, and there was a police officer who was doing a detail there, and he mentioned to me how overworked he felt. And it seems like we need to really look at the amount of hours that our police officers are spending out in these streets. And then we also need to look at, there's so many people who are unemployed right now, and I look at the details when people are fixing potholes, just wondering what the level of expertise is that is required to do that type of detail, and what opportunities do we have to create employment opportunities for folks as alternates to kind of man those details. I think that, these times require us to be really creative about how we're going to go about addressing these issues, and making sure that that we are really mindful of the social, emotional, and mental well-being of our police officers, so that they're able to interact with folks in ways that are healthy as well. So I think that this conversation is going to be robust, and I'm here for all of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councillor Flynn. Councillor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. And Madam President, please add my name. And just wanted to follow up on comments of Councilor Flaherty and Councilor Mejia. I think we also want to factor in, you know, what is the plan for Boston Police as it relates to many officers potentially retiring over the next year? Have they reached that age? Have they reached the number of years? And is there a good estimate on the potential of 50 people or 100 people retiring as Boston police officers over the next year? What impact does that have on our manning levels? What impact does that have on overtime as well? So those are important issues. We want to make sure the city is safe. And if we have a lot of potential retirees coming on board over the next 12 months or 18 months, that's something we should really factor in. And then my second point, Madam President, is like all the city councilors that go to community meetings almost every night, the first person that speaks at the community meeting is usually the community service officer, who provides an update on crime stats or trends in the neighborhood and what to look for and how we're working closely with the residents. But that community service officer program is exceptional in this city. Residents love them. Residents and neighborhood organizations depend on them for their expertise and working closely with the residents. So I would also like to see, as we have a discussion about police overtime, what impact will that have on our community, on CSOs, and the critical role they play in our city as well? Because like you, going to 4 or 5 meetings a night, and the CSOs are there also providing good information to the residents. That's also about building trust. That's about working closely with the residents. And that's community policing. So I just wanted to highlight those 2 issues as well. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn. The chair recognizes Councillor Arroyo. Councillor Arroyo, you have the floor.
Madam President, I just want to notice one thing too here, which is that they have a 90-hour-a-week cap, which I think is wildly unhealthy for our police officers and also for our constituents who interact with people on less sleep. The benefits of 90-hour work days in terms of working that many hours and the detriments to that are well noted by data. I think if we're talking about as fiscal stewards of this city, structurally ensuring that we're creating overtime measures that deal with the fact that folks shouldn't be working 90-hour weeks. I think, you know, if we're concerned about police officer safety, if we're concerned about constituent safety, then we should be looking at that. We should be looking at whether or not there's caps on how many days, how many weeks you can work 90 hours, which I don't believe there actually are. And so when we're talking about how much overtime officers are allowed to take or are mandated to take, I think we have to have a real discussion about how that impacts their ability to be effective on the job. I would also just stress that when we talk about police overtime, you know, I've spoken to captains in my district. I've spoken to officers working the beat. And what I've heard repeatedly is that the sort of doom and gloom concept that we don't have enough officers to work the district because we need overtime for that has actually been, what I have been told, is that it comes from a structural change in the way that we have all these separate units that aren't based at any one district. And so that if they decentralized, we'd actually have more officers on the base, on the district beat, actually making less in overtime because they have a home base. And so when we talk about how we look at overtime and how we work with overtime, I don't think it's a choice between somebody's going to answer your 911 phone call or somebody, or you're going to get a busy tone, right? Like that's not a real argument. And I think we really have to discuss how we look at structurally taking care of both our officers' health when it comes to 90-hour work weeks and where we step in on that. and how we actually fiscally steward the city, where we have a department that routinely runs over its overtime costs. And I think we have to really bear in and dig in on that in a real responsible way to our constituents and also for the help of those officers. And so, I just want to thank the makers for doing this and for making sure that we look at this policy and we hold them to the overtime that we've budgeted, and we create better structures to do that. If this was a private sector job and we had folks who were putting up that much money in overtime, we would question our business model. And so I think we have to really look at how this works and how this impacts our constituents and how it impacts our working police officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. Does anyone else want to speak who hasn't already spoken? Okay. The chair recognizes Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Flaherty, do you?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Just a footnote on the comments there. A lot of the offices in B2, B3, and C11, they're ordered in just for minimum staffing levels as well as to handle the volume of calls. So a lot of them don't want to be working 90 hours. In fact, many of them, it's time away from their own children and or the ability to have some of their own downtime. So, and to Councilor Flynn's point earlier, the attrition rate, we're in the middle of, back in the day when they put classes on, most of the classes were over 100 recruits. And so we're in the middle of where there's 3 or 4 classes right in a row that will be reaching mandatory retirement age of 65. And so we're going to have to address that, because the staffing levels right now, as stretched as they are because of the minimum staffing levels in some of the districts, but in order to keep up with attrition. So I think we're going to have a very frank conversation shortly about increasing, one, the number of cadets, the recruit cadets, and also 2, the number of classes that we're able to put on a year just to keep up with the minimum staffing level. So it's an interesting point that Councilor Flynn raised, but also wanted to add that these officers don't want to be working that much that they are. And unfortunately, they get ordered in by the command staff because of the volume of activity and the need to have the districts covered. So I appreciate the opportunity to just add a further comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Anyone else looking to add their name? Show of physical hands, please. Madam Clerk, if you could please add Councilor Flynn, Councilor Braden, Councilor Sabi George, Councilor Mejia, Councilor Flaherty, Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Edwards, Councilor Wu. Please also add the chair. Docket 0839 will be referred to the Committee of Ways and Means. We'll move on to docket 0840. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. Docket 0840, Councilors Bach and Campbell offer the following order for a hearing regarding police contracts as policy documents.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Bach. Councilor Bach?
Thank you, Madam President. I'd request permission to suspend Rule 12 and add Councilor Lydia Edwards as an original co-sponsor.
Hearing objections, Councilor Edwards is added.
Great, thank you. Almost every issue that we've discussed in terms of accountability and policing, both fiscal accountability and accountability around how force is used in our city and on our behalf, that has come up over the last 6 weeks, ties back in some way or other to the police contract. And I count us as in a fortunate moment in the city, in the sense that as we're having those conversations, our police contracts have come up for renegotiation. And so we're in a moment, our president talked about structural change. We're in a moment to really look at the structural documents that help structure those interactions in our streets every day. And that is a good fortune of timing. I think that while the council cannot be at the table in the negotiation of these agreements, but the whole reason why these agreements eventually come before the council for funding is because the council represents the public interest, right? There's a duly well-represented employee and employer interest that sits at the table and negotiates, but our role is about recognizing the public interest in these documents on really 2 fronts. So one is about relative proportionality, and this council actually sent a letter in 2016. A number of my colleagues who were on the body then, actually all of them who were on the body then were signatories because it was a 13-6 all council letter, expressing the fact that the compensation of our public safety departments has increased at a level that has far outstripped our civilian departments has created a skew in the city budget that really isn't sustainable to continue as a trajectory. And there are particular mechanisms in place in terms of how public safety contracts specifically are negotiated that has furthered that. And the council expressed back in 2016 that really was a trend that the council needed to be critical of and scrutinize because it affects the money that we have for everything else. And I think that point has really been driven home in the last couple of months, and us sort of raising that issue again and heightening our scrutiny on these documents for that public policy reason is really a fulfillment of that commitment going back several years. And so that's one important piece where the public interest comes into play. But the other important piece is that these contracts shape the conditions for the use of deadly force, which makes them public policy issues of the highest order. It's a life and death thing. And when the conditions of someone else's employment affect, the possibility that you might be in an interaction that, could lead even to death, it's something that we have to take really seriously as public officials. And I think every one of the reforms that has been discussed by this body, that has been called for by advocates, that the mayor has mentioned in his charge to the task force, almost all of those reforms to be effective need to be acknowledged in and have provisions in the police contract. So I think about, for instance, the discussion about a civilian review board and the reality that for decades under multiple police commissioners, we've had real trouble making terminations stick. And if you're going to have a civilian review board or any board that has that has some say over discipline and termination, it doesn't mean anything if there isn't a hook for that in the contract. And so when I think about that charge from President Janey to have structural change, I think that this is really a document where we need to see the parties step up in that vein to meet the moment. And while we, the council, are not at the table, we and the public can together talk about these implications of the contract in a way that creates and acknowledges the accountability climate that we're in for policing. And so in the same way that these negotiations have to happen in the context of, unfortunately, a very challenging economic climate, they also need to happen consciously and very awarely in the context of this accountability climate. So we're gonna have this hearing to really look at the contract piece by piece, to think about what are the public policy implications of this document. That's going to be a conversation between counselors and the public. There's a limited degree to which we can engage the parties at the table in coming and speaking to us directly on that. But that's why we have conversations out in the public to sort of shape the overall atmosphere. And this is something that the council and certainly the Ways and Means Committee this year is going to take extremely seriously. So I'm grateful to Councillor Campbell, again, the Public Safety Chair, who has been so focused on these issues for so long, and also to my colleague, Councillor Edwards, for her leadership on this as well. So thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much, Councillor Bach. The chair recognizes Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam President. And of course, thank you, Councillor Bach, for your leadership here. And thank you, Councillor Edwards, for the partnership. Many of the reforms residents, activists, and I have been pushing for absolutely must be initiated in the collective bargaining discussions. These include disciplinary practices for officers, overtime minimums and regulations, and training requirements for officers within the police department. With thousands of Bostonians calling for change and accountability in policing, we have to be absolutely more transparent about our police union contracts and discussions. And this cannot be done completely in private and with no sense of the administration's positions at the bargaining table. I want to know, for example, if the mayor is committed to eliminating the 4-hour minimum for overtime shifts or doing something with respect to that as a step towards reducing overtime cost. I want to know if our officers will be required to undergo more than rudimentary implicit bias training and instead a more robust and in-depth anti-racist training. I want to know, will we require updated use of force and de-escalation trainings and what that will look like, and not just for new folks going through the training academy, but for the officers who are already on the streets. I want to know that there will be enforceable accountability measures for officers accused of wrongdoing. and that the mayor is actually pushing for these changes in the contracts, which of course, as you said, Councillor Bach, connect to the Civilian Review Board. As I work with lawyers now to finalize legislation with respect to a Civilian Review Board, it is extremely difficult when you look around all of the apparatuses that exist in other municipalities across the country to create something as powerful and effective and substantive as what we see across the country without discussions or without knowing what the discussions are at the collective bargaining table. And so while I am sort of putting final touches on that and when we'll introduce it with other council colleagues, it's really challenging to push the envelope with respect to this accountability apparatus, the Civilian Review Board, without having a clear sense from the administration what their positions are here with respect to the limitations that the collective bargaining agreement puts in the way of creating a really effective Civilian Review Board. I want to be crystal clear too. I absolutely respect the privacy of the negotiating process, understand fundamentally the reasons why we have unions, the powerful history there and how important it is to have unions, and that employees feel protected in their rights and their legal rights, and administrators and employers as well. That is a very critical legal relationship, and I'm putting my legal cap on here. But it's critical too that the council, of course, continue to take bolder steps with respect to the contracts. And I think this is a unique time that we're in where residents are standing with us and demanding that we be more transparent with respect to what's happening at the bargaining table. And I think there's a way to do that where the administration and the mayor can, in very big picture, high level terms, say specifically what they're pushing for. But to remain silent is totally unacceptable when we have no idea what the discussion is related to other reforms that we as a legislative body are trying to push. So I'm absolutely looking forward to this hearing. I will tell you that, you know, we obviously have a vote that will come up and be asked to vote in favor of these police union contracts. And based on some of the things I just mentioned and many others, I don't see myself supporting contracts where some of these changes are not made, especially with respect to the Civilian Review Board. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. I absolutely think every reform that we push for, every stakeholder, including our officers, including our union leadership, should be at the table working in partnership. It's really hard to do this work where you pass an ordinance and you don't have the folks who are called to implement it at the table at the beginning. So I've been very intentional in making sure that that's the case. So looking forward to this hearing and having a robust conversation with every stakeholder we can imagine. So thank you, Councillor Bach, for the partnership. Thank you, Councillor Edwards, as well. And thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much, Councillor Campbell. The chair recognizes Councillor Edwards. Councillor Edwards, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Again, I would also echo the thanks to Councillor Bach and her leadership and really taking this conversation to, I think, a new level for the City Council. I also want to thank Councillor Campbell, not only for her steadfast leadership, but for, as she mentioned, the table setting she's already done and has been doing for years with law enforcement officers, and it has invited several folks, including me, to be able to be there. She has actually formed bridges for me personally with officers to make sure I knew who to contact, who to learn from. So I want to thank Councillor Campbell for her leadership. I'm excited to be one of the co-sponsors of this because I believe I bring not only a legal perspective like Councillor Campbell, but also a labor perspective as well. As you know, I've been fighting as an attorney for legal services, workers' rights, and union rights and unemployment. So I bring that perspective. And I, as Councillor Campbell noted, I firmly respect and believe in unions and the ability for workers to organize for the best contract that they can have. But this union is different. This union, as Councillor Bach noted, can use deadly force. This union is armed. This union also, unfortunately, has been used to counter and also suppress other workers organizing. This union is different. Now, that doesn't make them bad, but it does mean that when we go to approach how we're going to contract with this union, we need to come with the perspective of not only the now and the current movement about reform and culture shifts, but also with the understanding that this union is not only different, but it's extremely powerful. And so we are bringing that public perspective. And there are certain parts of this contract that need a new understanding and also need a new perspective. We cannot continue as we were before. So adding to the list of things that we need to look at in this contract and this back and forth, and also calling on the administration who is going to engage in this administration, that ultimately we need to make sure that we, one, are looking at how we discipline our officers? What's the process currently? Are we incentivizing officers to step in and intervene regardless of whether it's a superior officer doing something incorrect or wrong or immoral or dangerous? Are we, not only are we encouraging them, but are we benefiting them? Or do we have certain retaliatory protections for those officers who intervene? You know, we can all look to Minneapolis, and that man sat and kneeled on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and a lot of people looked at the officers around him. He had made a decision to do something evil. The question is why they didn't step up. What culture was it in Minneapolis that prevented them as young recruits, and I believe some of them were just in their first year, from stepping up and challenging a superior officer? Do we have that culture? Do we benefit? Do we move that? Also, how not only have we commented on compensation, but looking at how we also need to reform how we move and compensate certain officers for certain duties. You know, we bring up community service officers. Should that be overtime, or should that just be part of the job? Should we just consider increasing salaries instead of actually adding additional overtime? These are all things that need to be on the table. I had the pleasure to speak with New Orleans Police Chief yesterday, actually, to talk about their program called Ethical Policing is Courageous. It's called the EPIC program. And they did that. They were under a conservatory order because of the corruption and the issues and the police brutality issues in New Orleans for years. They're now one of the stellar examples of how to move and change the culture within the police. And they gave examples of how that happens at the police level. So I'm looking to see how we are encouraging courageous, ethical policing in Boston. I'm encouraged to see how that contract reflects it. And again, and to echo Councillor Campbell and Councillor Bach, I expect that kind of leadership to come from the officers. I expect good faith negotiations. I'm excited to see what they come up with for the solutions for today's issues. And if we don't see it, I'm encouraging my colleagues not to vote for the contract. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Would anyone like to add their name? Show of physical hands, please. Madam Clerk, if you could please add Councillor Braden, Councillor Asabi George, Councillor Flynn, Councillor Mejia, Councillor Arroyo, Councillor Flaherty, Councillor O'Malley, Councillor Wu. Please also add the chair. Docket 0840 will be referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. And now we'll move on to docket 0841.
Docket zero.
No, go ahead.
Sorry. Docket 0841, Councilors Bach and Mejia offer the following order for hearing regarding participatory budgeting for Boston.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Bach. Councilor Bach, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I request permission to suspend Rule 12 and add Councilor Braden as an original co-sponsor.
Seeing and hearing no objections, Councilor Braden is added.
Great, thank you so much. As has been referenced repeatedly, we saw a lot of public participation in the budget process this year, especially in the final stages of it. And I think what it really brought home to a lot of us is that having the public participation in our budget process look like public testimony at the end of hearings, at the end of a process on a mayoral proposal that we're stuck with an up and down vote in it's not satisfying for the public, and it doesn't get us the best results. We want the kind of wisdom and passion and insight that people are bringing to their public testimony to be part of our process earlier and further upstream in a way that allows it to bear real fruit in our budget process. And also, as we talk about civic engagement, we know that we can talk about lots of kind of conditions that help make it easier for people to participate civically, but one of the biggest determiners of that is, do people feel like what they do then has an effect on the result? And so we really want to look at how to build a more participatory budgeting structure into our whole budget structure. And I think that means looking at how we do this work earlier. So I'm excited to be co-sponsoring this with a couple of my fellow first-year council colleagues, Councilor Mejia and Councilor Braden. We hit our 6-month mark 2 days ago. And I think we're all obviously learning a lot. And then also, starting to think about, well, what are the ways that we could reimagine these processes? And we have a limited participatory budget process in the city right now that's just for sort of a particular group of youth, around $1 million in the capital budget. And so we want to understand how that's working, but I think it's clear that we need to really expand that vision. And there are models. New York has a $30 million participatory budget. There's a place, Porto Alegre in Brazil, that for a long time now has had a whole overlapping set of democratic assemblies that look at kind of district-based issues and then also look at some citywide issues and generate proposals that then move up the food chain and become part of the budget. And so while there is some degree of incorporating participatory budgeting into our process that would require charter change, and I will leave that to other colleagues to speak on a little later, I think that even within our existing charter, the council has the power in our consultative process about the budget to look for creative ways to make it more participatory, and that's what we're going to do. So we're going to have this hearing and sort of use it as a way to think about how we set that runway in the fall, so that we're not getting just to a fully baked budget that we're asking the public to testify on in the spring. So I'm excited about this, and again, I'm grateful to the co-sponsors, Councilors Mejia and Braden. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much, Councilor Bach. The chair recognizes Councilor Mejia. Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. When we first started out on our first budget season back in March, nobody in our office, I'm hearing an echo. I don't know if you guys, am I doing something wrong on my phone or my computer? Sorry. Redo.
Councilor Mejia, you're the only one logged in your office. No other computer should be logged in to the meeting from your office. That might cause feedback.
Shut it down, y'all. Okay, I'll start over. Thank you, Madam President. When we started out on our first budget season back in March, nobody in our office was fully prepared for what was to come. We were all budget newbies, and so we had a lot of surface level questions. But as we progressed through the budget process, we found that a lot of our constituents had the same surface question that we had, like, what is an operating budget? What is an external fund? What is a capital fund? And why are we moving from here to there? Just a lot of questions. And in full transparency, it was an amazing journey for us, and we brought our constituents along because we felt it was really important for people to go on this journey with us. Our office tried really hard to inform the public about what was going on. We made flyers, we made videos, and we asked the public to even submit questions on social media so we can bring the voices from the streets into our public hearings. So we were really intentional about that level of engagement. But as a city council, we need to do so much more than to bring people to the table. It was truly inspiring to see the level of advocacy and scrutiny that people brought to the police budget. But we need to see that same level of civic engagement in all departments, from the Office of Economic Development to the BPDA. Because this isn't the mayor's budget, as you all know, this is the people's budget. The budget is the council's most important responsibility, and it is our job to bring the people to the table, because if we're not at the table, we're always on the menu, and every single day we're being eaten up alive. So let's do what is right and make the budget process as transparent and as accessible as possible. I want to thank Councilor Bach for working on this issue and for her relentless scheduling of all the public hearings and working sessions that we participated in so that we walked in well prepared. But I will have to say that at the end of the day, I say that nothing about us without us is for us. And if we don't reimagine how we engage the public in this process, then we'll continue to be an afterthought. So really looking forward to having this hearing and getting down to business. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. The chair recognizes Councilor Braden.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Councillors Bach and Councillor Mejia, for your allowing me to join you in co-sponsoring this important issue. I'm really pleased to co-sponsor with you on this important hearing on modernising and democratising our annual budgeting process. In my first budget season as a new councillor, I had so much to learn, and I heard from thousands of constituents and members of the public who expressed their wishes directly, wishes to directly have more impact on how taxpayer dollars are allocated in the city's budgeting process. While it is true that our budget is a reflection of our values, the process of how that budget is decided is just as important. So many people feel excluded from the process, the budget-making process, and participatory budgeting is a positive way to directly engage with residents in order to bring more voices to the table when deciding how resources are allocated. A truly participatory budget process allows everyday community members to have access to the seat at the table, which would help instill much greater trust and confidence in the proceedings of municipal government. We have a critical responsibility to uplift and engage all of our communities, especially those who are most unheard and underrepresented and in this process. Thank you again, Councillor Bach, for your leadership on this, and I thank my colleagues for leaning into this conversation on true structural change as to how we do business in Boston. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Councillor Brayton. Would anyone like to add their name by a show of physical hands? Madam Clerk, if you could please add Councillor Flynn, Councillor O'Malley, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Wu, Councillor Sabi George, Councillor Arroyo, Councillor Campbell, Councillor Flaherty, and please also add the chair. Docket 0841 will be referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. And now we'll move on to docket 0842.
Docket 0842, Councilors Mejia and Arroyo offer the following order for a hearing to discuss the accessibility of small business outreach during ongoing COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes.
Sorry.
Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I also wanted to suspend the rules 12, and add Councillor Wu.
Thank you. Councillor Wu is added. Go ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. This is the third hearing order that we filed alongside with Councillor Arroyo and Wu. Every time we have one of these hearings about how we're managing COVID-19 recovery, we learn more and more about the work that we need to do in order to better hold ourselves accountable to the people we represent. Our office is the chair of the Committee of Small Businesses, and throughout COVID-19's pandemic, we have heard doom and gloom when it comes to our small businesses community and how they're going to recover. We knew back in March that the number of small businesses, particularly in Black and Brown owned businesses, might not be able to make it 3 months with the current cash flow. Well, it's been 3 months and time is running. It's been 3 months and time is running out. During this pandemic, we've heard departments talk about their quote unquote outreach efforts. And this is for me, one of the things that I really want to laser focus our intention on is, but what we need to really look at closely is what does outreach actually mean? Which neighborhoods were included? How many languages were offered? What type of, how many efforts and attempts were made in particular neighborhoods to ensure that the information was well saturated and that people who would normally not know about it will actually finally get access to this information. So I'm really curious about what that looks like, as well as the follow-up. One thing is to send out an email, to make a phone call, or even stop by, but if there's no follow-up and a little bit of hand-holding, then oftentimes things will just fall through the cracks. What we're really curious is that we can't take a risk at looking back and thinking what could we have done better. We're now at a time where we have to truly uplift, value, and validate the realities that small businesses are facing right now. I hope that we can have a solution-based conversation led by diverse small businesses to address their immediate needs. Thank you again to Councillor Arroyo and Wu for their work in the space, and really looking forward to ensuring that those who are living the realities are at the table, and that we're working with the administration to not only resolve this issue, but if we're really in the business of getting people into business and keeping them there, then we need to really look at how we're doing business in the city of Boston as well.
Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. The chair recognizes Councilor Arroyo. Councilor Arroyo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Councilor Mejia and Councilor Wu, for their partnership in this. I think Councilor Mejia summarized this really well. The reality is that our small businesses are the life of our communities. They're economic engines for our communities, and they have impacts that are much bigger than the small business connotation that we give them. And so, I think this is incredibly important to ensure that we reach out to our small businesses and provide all the aid that we can, and ensure that there's an equitable approach to that outreach and an equitable approach to the receiving of that aid. And so, I don't think I have much more to add there than that. And so I'll pass it up now to you, Madam President.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Wu. Councilor Wu, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Just wanted to thank the lead sponsors and co-sponsors here. It's important for the council and our oversight role, not only to think about the outcomes that the city has arrived at in terms of funding and policy, but also the processes by which and the outreach by which we got to those outcomes, so that we are always holding ourselves accountable to the highest standards. So I'm grateful for these colleagues in keeping that focus on every issue, access and outreach and inclusion. This directly translates into economic empowerment for businesses and families across our city. So eager to dig in on this front as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Those who would like to add their name, please indicate by raising your hand. Madam Clerk, if you could please add Councilor Sabi George, Councilor Flynn, Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Campbell, Councilor Bach, Councilor Edwards, Councilor Braden, Councilor Flaherty, and please also add the chair. Docket 0842 will be referred to the Committee on Small Business and Workforce Development. We'll now move on to docket 0843. Madam Clerk.
Docket 0843, Councilors Flynn and Flaherty offer the following order for a hearing to discuss the impact of Corey on access to employment and other opportunities.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Flynn. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I'm filing this hearing order with Councilor Flaherty to discuss how Corey impacts a person's ability in seeking employment and other resources, the effectiveness of existing Corey reform, and how we could further expand opportunities for people with Corey. The negative effects of criminal convictions have a devastating impact on many, especially younger people, but people in the communities of color who not only face higher conviction rates than whites, but tend to fare worse at baseline on employment outcomes, related measures as well. Criminal records often harm access to resources and opportunities for those with prior convictions. Despite progress made on Corey reform in recent years, there is still room for improvement. There are Corey reforms enacted by the state. In 2010, Governor Patrick signed the Massachusetts Criminal Offender Record Information Law into law. It was outstanding. It was excellent. It barred employers from asking early stage applicants questions about their criminal history, known as ban the box. And in 2018, Massachusetts legislature expanded the 2010 Corey Reform Bill, reducing the period of required disclosure for a misdemeanor. However, despite these reforms, records show that banning the box still often fails to reduce employer discrimination related to criminal records, and that there should also be focus on alternative measures to improve reentry prospects for people coming out of jail or prison. As a former probation officer, I witnessed firsthand the impact that Corey can have on one's ability to access opportunities to put them on the right path. In our discussion about racial equity and reforms in the criminal justice system, we should also be talking about how we can ensure that people with records are given a fair chance in getting jobs and other opportunities. I mentioned earlier the legislation signed by Governor Patrick, that it was excellent. But I think there's an opportunity for us as a society to go much further than that. Should someone with a Corey never be allowed to get a meaningful job in that person's life? I don't think so. I look forward to working with my advocates and my colleagues on this important issue, and looking forward to hearing from testimony, especially on people with Corys and how it's impacting them personally, especially in the job market or getting other services that are critical, housing services, job services. What other impact can a Corey have in someone's life? And I'm basing this hearing order not on as a city councilor for 2 years, but basically as a probation officer for 10 years, who has worked in the system and has worked on this issue for many years in trying to help people get into job training programs. But most of the time, at the end of the day, even when people are hired with the Corey, and when that background does come back, oftentimes that person is let go by a company, even though they were initially hired. So I think there's some room to improve this system, to give people an opportunity for a second chance, for a third chance, or a fourth chance, because everyone makes mistakes in life, and everybody deserves an opportunity to get a job and raise their family. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to Councilor Flaherty for joining me.
Thank you so much, Councilor Flynn. The chair recognizes Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Flaherty?
Thank you, Madam President, and thanks to Councilor Flynn for recognizing my leadership in the space, as well as the role he played as a probation officer here in the city and in the county. I've seen firsthand how Corey impedes a person's attempt to fully participate in their community and ultimately avoid recidivism, whether it's finding housing, securing a job, or quality job training program, or healthcare. Record-based discrimination can be an enormous barrier that disproportionately impacts those with records, their families, and loved ones. So as I've often stated, we are an opportunity-rich city, and we need to have broader discussions to bring about the necessary change in our city and in our Commonwealth with respect to the Corey system, and they need to be a part of that conversation. During my time on the council, particularly as council president, I created a special committee on Corey reform that played an enormous role in what we did as a body and as a city, and I've continued my advocacy in that area. As Councilor Flynn had recognized, both the city and the state have made progress around Corey reform. As an employer, we have standards that ensure that our hiring, as well as our vendors, have a fair shot through the hiring practices related to Corey. As a hub of resources for our residents, we also have the Office of Returning Citizens to connect those with Corys to legal services, job training, and opportunity through the Operation Exit program that our mayor has instituted. So I'm a firm believer, and always have been, and grew up in a household that believes that people should have second chances, in some instances third chances, and agree that we must have an honest discussion about Corey. This conversation needs to be about how we can connect people to opportunity, how we can ensure that we're providing people with fair and equal access to second chances, and also how we can get people to not be stuck in the cycles of joblessness and homelessness, and ultimately substance abuse and recidivism, and also being directed towards low wage earning jobs. So we've got some work to do. We've made significant progress, but particularly around the COVID portion of this and what has been highlighted. So I'm looking forward to a hearing where we can invite all of the stakeholders to share their knowledge and experience with our body, invite our constituents in to share some of their experiences, particularly those that have CORIs, that have been struggling to find meaningful opportunity, so we can work towards a solution at the city level and hopefully be a leader for the state and others to follow. Thank you, Madam President, and look forward to an expedited hearing.
Thank you so much, Councilor Flaherty. The chair recognizes Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll be quick. I just wanted to thank the makers for the hearing order. It's always an issue, right? Even though, you know, as they so eloquently mentioned, we have great protections in the law when it comes to actual implementation. We know that communities of color, particularly Black and Brown residents, are still disproportionately seeing barriers to good careers and jobs because of their CORI. And so I look forward to this hearing order and look forward to this discussion. Obviously, in the midst of COVID-19 and this pandemic, that has continued to sort of exacerbate how difficult it is, particularly for this population of men and women, to find meaningful employment. So anything we can do at the city level is critically important. And there are organizations on the ground that are working really hard, but nonprofits that are struggling because of COVID. So would love to think about how do we as a city partner with them and resource these organizations that have the trusting relationships with men and women who are returning to the city of Boston, and support them in the work while also sustaining these organizations that do such vital work. So thank you. Please add my name. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Mejia. Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the makers, Councilor Flynn and Flaherty. I'm excited to see you two taking up this issue, and I think oftentimes, you know, it's great to see our colleagues fighting the fight, as Councilor Campbell mentioned, you know, the bear the brunt often. When we're talking about issues of CORI reform and criminal justice, it's usually on low-income Black and Brown folks. So really, really grateful to both Flaherty and Flynn for taking this up, because it's going to take all of us working together to really figure out how to change systems that were designed to make it harder for folks to build wealth. As the chair of the Committee on Small Business and Workforce Development, our office is committed to economically empowering returning citizens. I previously worked in the space in a partnership with a program called Family Matters through the the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department, where we were providing wraparound services to ensure that our returning citizens, when they came back home, were well taken care of. And one of the things that I heard in every court meeting that I attended was how difficult it was for people to actually find gainful employment, which, as my colleagues mentioned earlier, how it continues to perpetuate to disrupt the cycle of poverty. So I'm really looking forward to this hearing, and as well as being part of the conversation. Thank you again to Councilors Flynn and Flaherty for working in this space and for your leadership. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Show of hands for anyone who would like to add their name, please. Madam Clerk, if you could please add Councilor Asabi George, Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Campbell, Councilor Wu, Councilor Braden, Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Edwards, Councilor Bach, Councilor Baker, and please also add the chair. I think you had Councilor Mejia. Councilor Mejia, are you adding your name? Yes, Councilor Mejia.
Councilor Wu. What about Councilor Wu?
Yep, I think it's all of us. Councilor Baker as well. I think it's all of us on that.
Thanks.
Docket 0843 will be referred to the Committee on Small Business and Workforce Development. We can go on to docket 0844.
Docket 0844, Councilors Flynn and Edwards offer the following resolution supporting Congressional Bill Senate 2043, Jabara Hare, No Hate Act.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Flynn. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. And I want to say thank you to Councilor Edwards for partnering with me on this, and also for her important work on this issue, and representing as a defense counsel, representing the marginalized in our society in a professional manner. So I want to say thank you to Councilor Edwards. This is a congressional bill that seeks to improve data collection on hate crimes and establish mechanisms to support law enforcement to identify and investigate hate crimes. Recent years, there have been an uptick in hate crimes in communities of color, immigrants, LGBTQ residents, ethnic minorities have experienced discriminatory incidents of hate crimes, and the COVID-19 pandemic is further exacerbating the situation, including on our AAPI residents and other immigrants as well. However, hate crimes are vastly underreported, often due to fear, as the U.S. Department of Justice report estimates that about 54% of hate crimes between 2004 and 2015 were unreported to local police. To prevent and address hate crimes, there needs to be accurate data and reporting. The No Hate Act, the federal proposal, addresses this issue by providing resources to local law enforcement to support their work in investigating hate crimes. This bill also encourages local law enforcement on establishing policy for the prevention and investigation of hate crimes, providing grants to states to establish hate crime hotlines. It allows judges to require individuals convicted of the hate crime laws to undergo community service centered on the impacted community. Recently, this bill was supported by the American Civil Liberties Union, the Human Rights Commission, the National Disability Rights Network, and many other organizations. Recently, Mayor Walsh and Attorney General Healy joined 19 area civil rights and business organizations also in support. I'm also proud that Mayor Walsh and the City Council are continuing to work on the Human Rights Commission. That's a critical agency, in my opinion, in the city. And I hope that also can play a major part on hate crimes. It was established under Mayor Flynn in the early 1980s. I hope that we can suspend and pass this resolution today so that we can send the City Council support for the passage of this bill. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to Councilor Edwards for joining me.
Thank you so much, Councilor Flynn. The chair recognizes Councilor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I again want to thank Councilor Flynn for his leadership and inviting me to be an original co-sponsor. This is about good policing. This is about being responsive. This is about being able to investigate and know patterns when it comes to hate crimes. As Councilor Flynn noted, many people do not come forward. That's also because many law enforcement agencies don't have a clear definition and are not keeping data. So many people who are victims of hate crimes think that they're the only ones. And they oftentimes internalize what happened to them and question what they were doing or not doing. And what was really important and what we need to see is real-time data and track the patterns of who is being targeted, how they're being targeted, when churches are being burned, whose churches, what synagogues, what mosques. These things are all important to track every day as they're happening. This helps us to investigate those crimes. It also is important that we standardize this mechanism so that it's a nationwide effort to really put down and eliminate hate crimes all throughout our nation. So I want to thank again Councilor Flynn for his leadership. I do hope all of our colleagues will join us in supporting this resolution and encouraging in support of the Congressional Bill 2043. Thank you.
Thank you. Show of hands for anyone who wants to add their name. Madam Clerk, could you please add Councilor Braden, Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Mejia, Councilor Campbell, Councilor Wu, Councilor Sabi George, Councilor Flaherty, and please also add the Councilor Arroyo, and please also add the chair. Thank you so much. Councilors Flynn and Councilor Edwards seek suspension of the rules and adoption of docket 0844. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it, and docket 0844 has been adopted. We'll move on to docket 0845.
Docket 0845, Councilor Bobby George offered the following order for hearing regarding the expansion of the Boston Emergency Services Team.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Asabi George. Councilor?
Thank you, Madam President. A critical win in this year's budget is the significantly more funding for the best clinicians, or the Boston Emergency Services Team, who are able to provide support to our residents when they are having a mental health crisis. This new funding of $2 million will allow us to expand the team and expand our city's ability to respond to a public health crisis in a way that provides support without criminalizing our residents. But we need to have a public conversation about what that will look like and how these clinicians will operate efficiently and appropriately to benefit our residents. They currently exist as a partnership between several city departments, the Boston Police Department, and Boston Medical Center. We don't want the best clinicians to simply have their hands tied because of a confusing bureaucracy, especially due to this significant investment. We want to make sure that the funding is there and leading to the support of our residents that are asking for this help. To that end, I look forward to having this hearing soon and a public conversation along with it. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much. Oops. Would anyone like to add their name? Show of physical hands, please. Madam Clerk, if you could please add Councilor Flynn, Councilor Braden, Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Mejia, Councilor Flaherty, Councilor Edwards, Councilor Campbell, Councilor Baker, Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Wu, Councilor Bach, and please add the chair. Docket 0845 will be referred to the Committee of Public Safety and Criminal Justice. Madam Clerk, could you please read docket 0846?
Docket 0846, Councilors Bach and Mejia offer the following order for hearing regarding zero-based budget visions for alternative community investment.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Bach. Councilor Bach, you have the floor. Councilor Bach, I think we're having difficulty with your audio.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, but I can't see you.
All right, let's see if we can.
Oh, now I can see and hear you. Oh, and you're here now. That was quick.
Sorry, that was me making a quick change in location. I think in the meantime,
Want me to come back to you? Do you want me to call?
I'm ready. Yeah, so thank you, Madam President. I would ask you to suspend Rule 12 and add Councilor Arroyo as original co-sponsor for this matter.
Councilor Arroyo is added.
Great, thank you. This is the second part of our effort, especially by the first-year councilors, to really re-envision the budget process. And I'm grateful to Councilor Mejia and Arroyo for co-sponsoring it with me. The notion of this order is twofold. One is really, again and again in our budget scrutiny process, as I mentioned before, we heard folks from the community offering visions of how we could really do things differently, do public safety fundamentally differently, make community investments and sort of change the way that we live and operate together in the city. There were the types of things that for us to shift money into them, we would need to set up the systems. We would need to think about how we shift personnel. But it can't be that because those things are ambitious and because they reflect a real vision of a different city, that there's no place for them in our budget process. And so what we need to do is make a place. And you know, I, for one, am committed to us shifting more resources out of traditional public safety and into things like this. And for that to happen, we need to be having these conversations this summer and fall. So the vision here is whether it's the People's Budget from Families, Justice, and Healing, or the suggestion from Action for Equity to think about our capital budget in a different way that really builds employment opportunities in this moment of recession for local folks in Boston. There's just a bunch of bigger picture changes that we want to create the space to discuss ahead of time, long before a mayoral budget is proposed, at a time at the point in the timeline where we can really shift things. And I think the proposal from Councillor Edwards, Wu, and Mejia around alternative nonviolent emergency response is another item like this. The phrase zero-based budgeting is a reference to a sort of wider tradition of saying, how about instead of every year starting our budgeting from our prior allocations, which are always going to keep you kind of thinking in the mode of the status quo, because you start with this year's budget and then you make your marginal incremental changes. What if we did the exercise of thinking from a zero basis, right? So you start with no dollars in any pots and you ask yourself, what are the core goals of the city? What are the results we're trying to achieve? And you build from that and you say, okay, if my number one thing were to really, achieve economic equity with these programs, or my number one thing is to keep the city safe. You don't start with all the ways that we've done that forever. You start with the thinking of what would be the most direct ways at that problem. And zero-based budgeting is an exercise that's been used repeatedly by lots of organizations, including ones at the federal level, even more complex and large than ours, to kind of check that instinct of bureaucracy to just reproduce what we've been doing before and to really envision a different structure. And we think that kind of thinking is what we need, and it's what a more wholly inclusive and kind of radically reimagined budget process would need. So I'm really excited to be calling for this hearing as a first step kind of in thinking in that direction, both in terms of our process and in terms of some of the concrete visions that we might be working towards. And again, grateful to my colleagues for their partnership. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much, Councillor Bach. Sounds exciting. The chair recognizes Councillor Mejia.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. As we can see, Councillor Bach has been busy blowing up the hearing today with all these things that she's filing, because she knows that these times require us to be a little bit more thoughtful and thinking outside the box if we really want to see the change that we've been hearing from so many that is needed. So I'm really excited to join you on this. But I'm going to be honest, is that the first time I heard zero-based budget, I didn't know exactly what that meant. And as with everything that deals with this, I'm Googling it all and learning. But when I actually learned what it meant, I was really excited to join you on this effort and to have this conversation, because it's exactly the type of approach that we need. And it's really reflective of what we've been hearing out in these streets in terms of like the people's budget. A zero-based budget is one where we have to justify all spending, not just the new spending. So instead of looking at why a certain department wants $1 million more here or $1 million less there, we take a holistic approach to the entire budget for each department. To me, it's a lot like our call for 50% IDP. I know that people thought we were crazy because we were asking for so much, but ultimately what it really is about is asking for what the need is in terms of the housing crunch that we find ourselves here in the city of Boston contending with. So I really love the concept in terms of like how this looks. But the way that we see it is that we shouldn't be just measuring what we need by what we already have. We need to be looking at where the need is and go from there. Analyzing our budget this way is a great opportunity to re-envision our budget from the ground up. We have to get this right, and we need to activate the voices of the people and encourage them to take a greater role in their budget so that these new processes can be more accessible to them. And I can't wait to get started on this. And I want to thank Councillor Bach and Councillor Arroyo for joining us on this effort. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think it's really important. I always talk about there's a difference between a need and a want. And oftentimes what we want may not be what we need, and what we need we never get. And I think that this type of thinking in terms of the budget really forces us to look at what is going to get us to really tackle the issues that we've been talking about for the last 50 years here in the city of Boston, so that we can finally move ahead. And looking forward to this hearing. And more importantly, I don't want to have a hearing about the hearing and a conversation about the conversation. I'm really hoping that whatever we discover in this process Councilor Bach in particular is that that we're able to really not see the budget as an afterthought. I mean, I think that we should start having conversations actually today about what 2021 and 2022 are going to look like. I mean, the fact that we don't get all the information until April, and then, you know, all of this negotiating and all this willing and dealing happens, I don't think it doesn't resonate with my soul. It doesn't necessarily resonate with my values. And I think that turning the whole concept upside down is exactly what is needed during these times. So looking forward to the conversation, and more importantly, to changing the way that we do business here.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Arroyo. Councilor Arroyo, you have the floor.
President, I just want to thank Councilor Bach and Councilor Mejia for their work on this. I'll keep it short, but I just want to say that, you know, we just went through a pretty strenuous budget process. We all know that our budgets and where we put our dollars reflect our values, and I think that this is a way of ensuring that our budgeting process is about ensuring that our departments meet our values and meet the values and the goals in which they're setting for themselves, and that we budget appropriately and accordingly for those things, rather than incremental dollars here or there. And I think that's a great new way of looking at how we put together our budgets. And so with that, you know, I'm happy to be on board, and I want to thank Councilor Bach for her leadership on this.
Thank you so much. Would anyone like to add their name, please? Show of physical hands. Madam Clerk, if you could please add Councilor Flynn, Councilor Braden, Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Wu, Councilor Asabi George, Councilor Campbell. Please also add the chair, and Councilor Flaherty and the chair. Thank you so much. Docket 0846 will be referred to the Committee of Ways and Means. We'll now move on to docket 0847.
Docket 0847, Councilor Asabi George offer the following resolution in support of appropriating funding for Massachusetts public schools through the Student Opportunity Act.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Asabi George. Councilor, you have the floor.
Thank you again, Madam President. The Student Opportunity Act passed in November. It represented a historic and essential update to the state's formula for funding public education. For decades, the state's formula underfunded our schools and did not meet the real cost of educating our students. The act is supposed to provide $1.5 billion in new funding over the next 7 years due to correcting the mechanism that led to the chronic underfunding of low-income students, English language learners, and special education students, as well as the healthcare costs for our educators. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed our state's inequities even more and shows us exactly why the Student Opportunity Act is necessary. However, the state has yet to appropriate this critical funding. This resolution reiterates our support for the act and urges the state legislature to fully fund it. We cannot let the pandemic be an excuse to further delay fulfilling our promise to our children's education. Our schools have waited too long, and if the legislature acts now, we'll be more able to weather repercussions of this pandemic in the years to come. I ask that you all sign on to this resolution and send a clear message to the legislature that we, as representatives of the City of Boston, wholeheartedly support the Student Opportunity Act. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much. Would anyone like to add their name? Okay. Madam Clerk, could you please add Councilor Braden, Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Wu, Councilor Flaherty, Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Bach, Councilor Mejia. Please also add the chair. And Councilor Mejia, if you'd like to say a few words.
Of course, you know I do.
All right, go ahead.
You know that this is my thing, education, Madam President. And I just would love to just give a shout out to Councilor Asabi George for her relentless commitment in the education space. Really grateful to you for all that you do on behalf of our most vulnerable learners. I'm proud. I was, during my time in the education space, we worked with parents who were having a hard time navigating the educational landscape. Before the Student Opportunity Act, it was the Promise Act. Before that, it was the RISE. Before that, God knows what it was. And every year, it felt who continue to fight, and we always got the leftovers. And so this particular past year, we worked with Senator Chang Diaz on the Student Opportunity Act, and it's crucial that we continue to push forward for fully funding, and that our schools get what they need, and so that our students can ultimately finally be successful, because I believe generation after generation we keep losing students, and we're not doing our due diligence by funding our schools properly. And this constant drip, 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 drip of funding, it just can't continue to happen when it comes to our education system. This is why we continue to live in poverty. And so there is no excuse for underfunding. And we have seen this in the Boston Public Schools, and we need to work collaboratively, both on the inside and on the outside, to make sure that we're seeing the type of funding that our students deserve. So here for all of it. Thank you so much, Councilor Sabi George, and you too, Madam President, for your relentless commitment to issues of educational equity. A long time in this fight with you too. So thank you for your service.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Flaherty?
Thank you, Madam President. Just want to commend our colleague, Councilor Anissa Sabi George, for this and enthusiastically add my name. It's absolutely imperative that our district receive the full appropriation for the Student Opportunity Act as part of the fiscal year 21 budget negotiations. We all know what the impact that COVID-19 has had on our Boston Public Schools, particularly as it pertains to closing the opportunity and the achievement gap, particularly for our low-income students. So along with English language learners and our special ed kids. So the state cannot delay investment to our school systems any longer. And so this is very timely, and appreciate the lead sponsor's efforts, as well as her efforts as our Chair of Education, who does a great job on behalf of all of us here on the council. So please add my name, and look forward to having this resolution adopted.
Thank you so much, Councilor Flaherty. The chair recognizes Councilor Campbell. Councilor Campbell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Just want to thank Councilor Sabi George for her leadership, and please add my name.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, would you please add my name? And I also want to say thank you to Councilor Sabi George for her long time work on this important issue. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much. Councilor Sabi George seeks suspension of the rules and adoption of docket 0847. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Docket 0847 has been adopted. Madam Clerk, could you please read docket 0848?
Thank you. Docket 0848, Councilors O'Malley and Edwards offer the following order for hearing on establishing a municipal fair housing testing program in the city of Boston.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor O'Malley. Councilor O'Malley, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. First off, I'd ask that we could suspend Rule 12 and add Councilor Bach as an original co-sponsor.
Yes, Councilor Bach is added. Absent objection. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I also noticed, I believe, Councilor Sabi George and Councilor Edwards may have a similar hearing order coming down a little bit later in the agenda. So happy to work and coordinate with them if it makes sense. Our city has seen an unprecedented boom in housing development over the past several years. While adding to our housing stock is certainly needed, we must ensure that it does not come at the cost of displacing those who are the most vulnerable. A recently published study by Suffolk University Law School found that Black residents searching for housing in the city of Boston face discrimination based on their race 71% of the time, and voucher holders face discrimination in a staggering 86% of cases. Even these researchers who've worked in the field of housing discrimination for years said, quote, "This was a shocking result for us." Similarly, there was a 2019 study by the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston that found that discrimination towards voucher holders is even worse in our city's, quote, higher opportunity neighborhoods, and that race of the voucher holder had an even deeper impact in these neighborhoods. Now, Mayor Walsh recently declared that racism is a public health crisis in this city, And this city council, led by Councilor Ricardo Arroyo, started that conversation back in March. Moreover, the World Health Organization has stated that access to quality housing is essential for quality public health. By allowing discrimination in the housing market to exist in Boston, we are compounding these two health crises during a global pandemic. This is unacceptable. On top of this, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council predicts that when the state's eviction moratorium ends, there will be roughly 120,000 households who will be at risk of being unable to pay their rent and therefore risk of potentially being evicted. Many of these households are Black and Latino. If evictions occur and families are thrust into a housing market that discriminates against them for their race or source of income, we will see irreversible displacement to an unprecedented degree. City Life, Vita Urbana, and MIT researchers have found that despite only 18% of renters living in majority Black neighborhoods, 37% of evictions occur in those very neighborhoods. And while COVID-19 has exacerbated the issue of displacement in these neighborhoods, there is a long-existing systemic problem that we need to tackle from as many angles as humanly possible. Through the Fair Housing Office, the city has partnered with Suffolk University to conduct fair housing tests when complaints are brought to them directly. This is similar to the secret shopper method where you would have someone investigate these claims. And it's important, and it's a very good program that has existed, and we appreciate those who've been working on it. However, the way the program is currently constituted, it requires those seeking housing to go out of their way to submit claims, often while still searching for a place to live. Some would argue that it's a lot more reactive as opposed to proactive. The program also is largely reliant on HUD funding, which, as we all know, can be volatile and hard to rely on, particularly with a presidential administration who has demonstrated its racism and incompetence time and time again. So we must fund this testing as a city to allow everyone a chance at fair housing despite their race or source of income. We need to focus on testing, enforcement, education, and research. I think there's an incredible opportunity to work with some of the incredibly talented men and women who work in housing nonprofits, as well as our Office of Housing Stability, and so many great housing advocates and employees for the city. I look forward to partnering with other colleges, universities, graduate schools, and particularly law schools to be able to conduct this program. And it's a way that we can do it at very little or no cost to the taxpayer to make sure that we're not only complying with the law, but we're doing everything we can to address and dismantle systemic racism as it relates to housing, and is so prevalent in so many of our cities in here, so many of our neighborhoods in Boston, and so many of our cities across the Commonwealth and across the United States. I'm delighted to partner with both the District Council from East Boston, who herself has been an amazing housing leader, advocate, as well as one of our newer colleagues, the District Council from Beacon Hill, who similarly has done some remarkable work in the housing field. This is a great opportunity for this district, for this council to lead, to make a real impactful difference, and to continue to do the work that is so important now more than ever. Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you again to my two colleagues for their partnership in this important endeavor.
Thank you so much, Councilor O'Malley. The chair recognizes Councilor Edwards. Councilor Edwards, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you to Councilor O'Malley for this partnership. I am excited about this possibility. I think this dovetails wonderfully with the work the council is already doing and the mayor has committed to completing, which is a zoning amendment to affirmatively further fair housing. It dovetails because that amendment looks at housing from the planning perspective before the buildings are built. And this is actually dealing with discrimination and oppression on the part of the real estate agent when the things are built and when we're trying to sell them. We're literally dealing with the bookends of the industry. And as I've stated, and as some of my colleagues have stated, this industry, real estate, has been probably the biggest driver of segregation in our city, if not the nation. The industry specifically has had a horrible history of valuing dollars, of valuing bottom lines, of valuing racist policies over not only the law, but simply morality. The fact is, we as a city need to be ever vigilant. Every single time something happens to prevent Bostonians from being able to stay in Boston, that's a concern for us. And especially when it comes to discrimination. We have a unique burden because our city is unique in our race relations. We need to lead, and we need to create the programs that help us to lead. I have actually been a tester in this program. I was actually recruited by Suffolk, and I've done it. I've done the calls, I've gone to the units, I presented myself, and then gave back the data. It is something that anybody can do, and it's something that all of us should be a part of, eliminating and eradicating systemic racism in our housing. This is going to help us to remove it root and branch from our housing market. And it's going to also help us identify the bad actors. Who's actually hurting people? Who's discriminating against people? Down to the real estate agent, the agencies, down to the buildings. We'll be able to find that out as it's happening and be able to respond to it. I look forward not only to this coming to fruition, but the city of Boston demonstrating that it can create one of the most robust anti-discrimination programs in the country. I'm beyond excited. Thank you, Councilor O'Malley, for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Bach.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you to Councilor O'Malley for his leadership on this, and to Councilor Edwards, as always, for leadership on housing and fair housing. And I couldn't agree more that this is the bookend to the affirmatively furthering fair housing zoning amendment that we're working on. And I just think it's so important. Honestly, when I used to work at the Housing Authority, we used to speculate about when we would next get something like a real testing evidence from Suffolk, because we were seeing anecdotally lots of things, but it was hard to sort of pin down exactly the proof of what's happening. And you really do need this kind of pair testing. And I think that it's ironic because all it's really done is confirmed what we already knew. But I think that confirmation has to spur us to sort of structural institutional action. And, I'm really encouraged by the example Seattle back in 2015, 2016, they did their Office of Civil Rights, which sort of plays the role that our Office of Fair Housing and Equity does. They did a whole testing regime that then resulted in them bringing actions against first 13 and then another 23 landlords who collectively were landlords to thousands of units in the city. And basically all of those claims were settled, and the effect that it had was a chilling effect on discrimination in the real estate market in the city. And that's really what we have to do. I think the study that just came out has just shown us how much, this is an accumulation of individual brokers, individual landlords making a series of steering decisions that collectively add up to doubling down on decades of segregation. And the city can't catch everybody in the act, but if the city goes after this aggressively through a program like what Councilor O'Malley and we are proposing today, the city has the potential to do enough to really chill that instinct and get people to think twice about discriminating in that way. And I really do think that this is something where we need this kind of enforcement action to really draw that line, because otherwise I think people are going to continue to differentially market units in the ways that they have for a long time. So I really want to thank Councilor O'Malley for bringing this today, and say that I hope it's something that we can quickly transition and partner with the administration to transition from being a hearing order into being a concrete policy. So thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Campbell. Councilor Campbell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I just quickly want to thank the makers and Councilor O'Malley. Thank you for your leadership here. I think you cited the statistics quite well. Very disturbing reports, reading those, and especially when you think about all of whether it's the national collective trauma we're going through with respect to George Floyd, but also the pandemic, to see these numbers was just really disheartening. So I immediately saw this on the docket and thought this is such a creative solution and something we could do immediately. And it's an easy lift. So look forward to supporting it. Thank you. And thank you, of course, to Councilors Edwards and Bach as well. Please add my name. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Show of hands for anyone else who wants to add their name. Madam Clerk, could you please add Councilor Flynn, Councilor Braden, Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Sabi George, Councilor Mejia, Councilor Wu. Please add Councilor Flaherty. Please also add the chair. Very important. Kudos to the makers on this. I too was a tester for Suffolk, so I saw firsthand how folks are treated out there in the real estate world. My very first apartment was a Section 8 apartment, And I know what it was like as a young single mom trying to find a place to live with me and my daughter. So very important, and looking forward to this hearing order, as Councilor Bach said, becoming some sort of policy here, and would suggest to the chair of the committee, so this is getting ready to get assigned to a committee, and it is very similar to the Section 8 voucher discrimination one, that perhaps those two hearings could be held back to back because they are very similar, and Edwards is a co-sponsor on both. So thank you guys. Thank you to the makers, and docket 0848 will be assigned to the Committee on Housing and Community Development. We will now move on to docket 0849.
Thank you. Docket 0849, Councilor Edwards offered the following resolution in support of hotel safe operations.
Thank you so much. Chair recognizes Councilor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Madam President. This is a very common sense stance in solidarity with essential workers who are on the front lines and keeping us safe and assuring that we are that our economy can still function, and also that our hotels and our tourism industry, which is trying to come back, can do so in the safest manner. This is a simple ask from our body to support these workers in their push to make sure that daily cleanings of rooms is happening. Essentially, that's it. The fact is that hotel industry has changed. People are staying in their rooms longer. They're actually congregating and having parties and inviting people over to their hotel rooms versus using the conference rooms or other common areas throughout the hotels or throughout the complex. And so what does that mean? That means in those areas where there's daily cleanings required, we need to take the same treatment that we have for them to the bedrooms, to the guest rooms, to make sure that we have daily cleanings happening. This is necessary because we're in a pandemic. This is necessary to keep us safe. It's also necessary to keep the workers safe out of respect for what they have to do. And it's extremely hard. It's extremely hard to go in and clean hotel rooms. It's extremely hard to do so when someone's been there for several days and they've had parties. So we're asking simply to stand in solidarity with these workers who are asking to treat these hotel rooms as common areas and to have daily cleanings. For those who are concerned about privacy, that's what the Do Not Disturb sign is for. No one's stopping that. Put that up if you really want it. But at the end of the day, this is to the industry. This is to the hotel owners. What we're asking for is that you provide the best working conditions for these essential workers. They keep us all safe, and daily cleanings is vital to that. And this, to me, is common sense. And so I'm asking my colleagues to sign on to this resolution in support of that request, in support of those workers that we stood with them many times before. And I'm asking that we suspend the rules and pass this resolution today.
Thank you so much, Councilor Edwards. The chair recognizes Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam President, and we commend the maker. Please add my name as a co-sponsor. And this is a classic example of moving forward with respect to COVID. This being cute and cutting corners is completely unacceptable and cannot be the norm in sort of our new norm. So not just in this sector, but in all sectors, particularly we're thinking about our colleges and universities are going to be inviting students back. If tourists are going to start to come back to Boston, cutting corners in trying to be cute with COVID is completely unacceptable, perilous, borders recklessness, and I heartily support this initiative and this resolution put forth by our colleague, Councilor Lydia Edwards. Our hotel workers, they deserve better than this. And our hoteliers know better than this. And so this thing speaks for itself, and we need to stand together on this and make sure that we're drawing the line in the sand immediately before this type of behavior festers, not just throughout the whole hotel and hospitality industry, but in our restaurants. As we're all starting to open up, social distancing, the mask, all of that, the hand sanitizing, sanitizing in general, all of that stuff has to continue with complete diligence and extra effort, not being cute and sidestepping it, but extra effort has to going in to make sure that every place where the public will have access to is completely clean and sanitized. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. And again, proudly support our hotel workers and hopefully this can get done today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, please add my name. I would like to say thank you to Councilor Edwards for her long time work and support of our hotel workers. Our hotel workers play a critical role in our city. They're often the first people a visitor, a tourist sees when they come to Boston is the person that cleans the room. And many of those people that clean the rooms live in my district, and I'm proud to represent many of them. Many of them are in the AAPI community. And as Councilor Flaherty said, the hotels are trying to be cute. They're trying to save some money. You know, they're being reckless. They're not dealing with COVID-19. They're not dealing with public health. And it's critical. Every day, hotels should be cleaned. They should be cleaned professionally by highly trained people that go to school for that have experience in that. And for hotels to try to save a couple of dollars is reckless. And it's also, you're also hurting so many families that depend on that wage for these hotel workers. So shame on our hotels that are trying to be cute and trying to have it both ways. You need to be a good citizen and a good neighbor. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much, Councilor Flynn. The chair recognizes Councilor O'Malley. Councilor O'Malley, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me start by saying when a guy from Southie calls you cute, it's seldom a good thing. So I wanted to put that right up there. Obviously, congratulations to the lead sponsor, the District Council from East Boston, for once again her leadership. This is such an important issue, one that I am proud to support. As we think about the sort of first line essential workers that we as a city and we as a country have been collectively lauding over the past couple of months, we need to continue that support in the months ahead as we talk about reopening as a city, as we talk about potentially reopening as a country. And Councilor Edwards is 100% right. You know, for many years, hotel rooms would sort of be the place where people would stay at the end of a night on vacation or on a work event. And now they really have become de facto meeting rooms. And that will only get more pronounced in the months ahead, particularly as we talk about college students, many of whom may be using hotel rooms as dormitories if indeed these schools come back. So this problem is only going to get worse. And we need to do everything to provide for the safe and health of those essential workers. And I would put those in the hospitality industry, particularly those who are cleaners and custodians at the top of that list. These are men and women who work incredibly hard each and every day and potentially open themselves up to real risk of contracting a potentially deadly disease, a deadly virus. So anything that we can do to stand with them and support them, we ought to be doing. Congratulations to the lead sponsor for her leadership. Once again, look forward to adding my name and voting in the affirmative.
Thank you so much. Would anyone like to add their name? Show of physical hands, please. Madam Clerk, if you could please add Councilor Braden, Councilor O'Malley, Councilor Bach, Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Sabi George, Councilor Mejia, Councilor Wu, Councilor Campbell. I think you already have Flynn and Flaherty. Wonderful. Councilor Edwards seeks suspension of the rules and adoption of docket.
Did you add your name, Madam President?
Oh, yes, please, please.
Thank you.
Absolutely, indeed.
I knew you would.
Exactly. Shout out to Local 26, too. Councilor Edwards seeks suspension of the rules and adoption of docket 0849. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. The ayes have it, and docket 0849 has been adopted. We'll move on to docket 0850.
Thank you. Docket 0850, Councilors Asabi George and Edwards offer the following order for hearing regarding Section 8 voucher discrimination.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Councilor Asabi George. Councilor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd first like to suspend Rule 12 and add Councilor Braden as an original co-sponsor.
Being here, no objections, Councilor Braden is added.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. From August 2018 to July 2019, Suffolk University's Housing Discrimination Testing Program sent 200 testers out into the Boston area housing market. The testers represented different walks of life present in our city. At the end of June, they released the results of that study. 71% of Black testers face discrimination. 86% of Section 8 voucher holders face discrimination, no matter the person's race. It is illegal to discriminate against tenants because of their race, and it is illegal to discriminate them because of the source of their income. Housing vouchers provide landlords with guaranteed rental income and ensure our housing insecure families have a place to call home. My office has been working with the Boston Housing Authority and the Department of Neighborhood Development to find new landlords who would be able to house our voucher holders. But this is not enough if the vast majority of voucher holders are routinely denied housing. We need to look at what those other mechanisms are, and I think Councillor O'Malley and others with the earlier filing are working to answer some of these questions. But those questions are, what are the other ways that the city can enforce our rules around housing discrimination? Do we need to update our codes? And are there things that we can do on our end to streamline the process so landlords aren't stuck in the red tape? Will it take a public awareness campaign and other strategic thinking for us to respond to this? We certainly need to have an open conversation about this. And by the show of this earlier hearing order presented before us today, I think that we're all very much willing and open and desire this conversation around why discrimination is happening and how we can stop it. Even before the pandemic, we've had a family homelessness crisis here in the city of Boston, and it's only gotten worse. And if we don't ensure that there is a pathway to stable housing, it will continue to be a huge burden on our city and certainly on the families that are dealing with homelessness across our city. I do appreciate and think that it would be best to sort of merge these two as they have significant overlaps during the hearing, but I would also offer an opportunity and like to hear from Councilor Braid and Councilor Edwards. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Edwards.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Councillor Sabi George for her leadership and initiating this and inviting me to be a part of this. I really am excited for this conversation. I do think they should be at least on the same day and certainly on the same vein of looking at how we are treating some of our most vulnerable residents. And what this is particularly, I think, painful to see is that even when given the money, even when given the resources to pay the rent, even now when we have increased the average voucher in Boston, in my district alone, the average Section 8 voucher in Charlestown went up almost $1,300 on top of what they were getting before. Even with increased funding, people cannot get housing. And that speaks to how deeply ingrained discrimination, oppression, and stigma is when it comes to being poor, when it comes to be a Black person, when it comes to be a person of color, when it comes to being a single mother, when it comes to having children. That is what we're trying to attack. And this is going to add to that conversation because, yes, we know that there is discrimination in all forms, but when it comes to this particular form, this is the largest rent assistance program in the nation. And if this is not working, if this is still hitting roadblocks, then we are failing to actually integrate. We are failing to help our most poor people. And honestly, we're kidding ourselves if we think we're doing anything by adding money to it. I'm excited about this conversation because we're leading as a city. We're going to create our own city-based voucher program. This, if we don't figure out how discrimination is impacting the current Section 8 voucher program, then it's adding more vouchers and adding more people in the line that have the resources to pay isn't going to do anything. So when we get the data back from the new program that I know we're going to set up in the city of Boston to look at the discrimination and who, that's what's key, who is discriminating, what real estate agent, what property, what neighborhoods, we'll get all of that real life data. We'll be able to see it. And then we'll be able to see why they're discriminated against them. When we get those two married together, this body, this administration will be able to attack it full front. And I expect us to stand strong with the data and take it on. we have to again ask ourselves if we are going to be committed to this true structural change for our city to be a city for anyone to come and call home. I am blessed that I was able to do that. I am not born here. I chose Boston, and I'm so blessed that my district then chose me. But so many people don't have that opportunity. And matter of fact, there are a lot of people born and raised in Boston whose only choice is to leave the city they love. So we're going to fight to make sure that people have a real choice, that the voucher means something in this city. And I'm so thankful, Councilor Sabi George, for you asking me a partner in this. And I'm so excited to have this hearing where we create the program and also deal with this acute discrimination. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Braden. Councilor Braden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to Councillor Sabi George and to Councillor Edwards for their leadership in this area. I am absolutely delighted and excited to be a co-sponsor in this very important hearing. While we've already talked about this in our preceding conversations, but our city housing crisis that predates the COVID health crisis, in that Section 8 housing vouchers have allowed very many low-income families to find housing in the private market rather than live in public housing or other low-income housing. And the findings of this study are incredibly distressing and discouraging. And I look forward to the initiative on the testing initiative, but I also look forward to this hearing to really dig deep into this issue. Here in Alston Brighton, I was involved with trying to assist a family in use their voucher to find housing in Alston Brighton, and it was absolutely impossible. We explored every opportunity and it just wasn't happening. We could not find a landlord who would take a Section 8 voucher family in this neighbourhood at the time we were looking. And our local CDC has a wait list of 17,000 families and individuals waiting for low-income housing. And we know there's housing available, and it's really, really important that we dig deep into this and get to the bottom of this and change what's happening. It is a very unjust and inequitable system, and I hope that I can be part of fixing that problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Councilor Braden. The chair recognizes Councilor Bach. Councilor Bach, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to commend the makers and thank them. I want to thank the council for, back in March, we passed a resolution calling on landlords to house our Section 8 families. And throughout this crisis, the Housing Authority, D&D, several council offices, mine, Councilor Sabi George's, have been working really hard to make those placements and to, when the music stopped, we had these empty apartments around the city, and then we had families who couldn't find housing. And so we've been trying to pair them up. But this discrimination is just such a persistent barrier. And for me, it's sort of personal. It feels like unfinished business. Councilor Edwards referred to the fact that we significantly increased the amount that our vouchers could pay in many neighborhoods of the city. And that was the last big policy push that I made at the Housing Authority before coming into this role. And in the one sense, I'm really encouraged by that. We've actually seen that's only been in effect for a year now, and we've seen 2% of Boston Housing Authority families move into neighborhoods that had previously been sort of like cost prohibitive for them to live in. And that means a lot. It's a small number, but it's 250 families, which for each family, being able to have that full range of choice and make it is really important. But I think in some ways now it's like, okay, the barrier that was always listed for why our families found so many parts of the city and parts of even the region that they couldn't live in was supposed to be cost. Now we've, significantly improved the cost situation, and we find, oh, right, the discrimination that we knew was there is there and creating a huge block to our families. And I think it's discouraging, but what's hopeful about that is that having made that policy change on the cost side, if we can mow down these barriers of discrimination, we really have the opportunity to create pathways to integration in our family through people deciding in our city, through families deciding where they want to live and not being excluded by the bias of others in a way that we haven't done. I wanted to say for generations, but really ever in this city. And so to me, it's a sobering and depressing reality, but it's also one where if we grab the bull by the horns and make this the moment where we really push back and push into a fair housing vision in the city, we're standing on the edge of being able to make that real change. So I think specific Section 8 discrimination is an important protected class for us to keep our eyes on in this process. And so I agree with the president's suggestion to combine these two conversations, but I also think we should keep this thread that Councilor Asabi George and Edwards and Braden have called out around Section 8 discrimination specifically, because it is so persistent. So thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Mejia.
Yes, thank you, Madam President, and thank you to Councilor Asabi George, as well as Councilor Edwards, Bach, and Braden for your continued leadership in the housing space. I'm super inspired by this conversation. You know, I talk a lot about the fact that I grew up with a Section 8 voucher, and my mom and I moved from place to place because every time we would find a place to live, we wouldn't be able to get too comfortable because the rents were extremely high. And I think that a lot of it had to do with the fact that we were Latino, right? And so I think that this conversation is long overdue. And I'm so super excited. This council meeting has given me a sense of hope because I am really looking at the type of things that we're proposing and the type of thinking that we as a council are really considering and how we move and address real racial inequities. So I'm really grateful to Councilor Asabi George for bringing this conversation to the table. I know that a lot of the parents that I worked with when I worked in the education space could no longer afford to live in Boston, and now they're living in Brockton and Randolph and Stoughton, but yet they still have to work in Boston. And so what we're doing is we're pushing people out and forcing them to live in different spaces because this is part of what the history of Boston has been about, is segregation. And nothing hurts more than to know that you're not wanted on a block. And I think that this opportunity for us to dig deeper could give us the type of information that we need to move forward. So thank you, Councilor Asabi George, for your continued leadership in all things that deal with housing and homelessness and supporting our families. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Campbell. Councilor Campbell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. And I just quickly wanted to thank Councilor Asabi George, Councilor Braden, and Councilor Edwards for bringing this hearing order forward, and Councilor Bach for the work that she did at the Housing Authority. We were in constant communication with respect to this issue, but so many other ways in which to help families that are living specifically in public housing have not just one way, but many ways and many tools available to them to move out of poverty, to move into home ownership opportunities, to build wealth, to build equity. And what we knew to be true, right, it wasn't just the money, that race shows up in many sectors. And if you really understand the ugly history of Boston, right, not just federal policies, but the role that government has played federally, state, locally, to ensure that certain people could not live in certain communities, right? Could not buy in certain communities, could not sort of put a stake in the ground. Oh, that's my house phone. I feel like you, Madam President, the house phone is going off. So I just, I'm really excited for this hearing order, really excited to be a part of this and adding my name, and that's just going to keep on going. But it's a serious matter, and race does play a role here. There's a historical context. Oh my God. Let's try that again. So thank you. This is Shires. But there's a historical context here that most folks don't want to sort of talk about because it involves race. It involves a deep level of uncomfortability. But in order to get these policies or sort of the effects of these policies in the past that have created current neighborhoods where largely people of color are concentrated in public housing with poor housing stock, we have to talk about it. We have to be sort of upfront. And then, of course, using an equity lens to create something different. That's why equity is so important. So thank you again to the makers. I apologize for just all of that, but really excited for this conversation. The data and in the recent reports, already confirmed what people already knew, but it was still very depressing in the middle of COVID-19, in the middle of the police brutality we're talking about across this country, to review these reports and see that once again, race is playing a role in holding people back who are working really hard to move forward, right? This isn't individual responsibility. This is systems that continue to oppress. So this is a real opportunity to think about doing something different and for Boston truly to lead in many aspects. So thank you again to the makers and thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much. Anyone looking to add their name, please raise your physical hand. Madam Clerk, if you could please add Councillor Bach, Councillor O'Malley, Councillor Flynn, Councillor Arroyo, Councillor Mejia, Councillor Flaherty. Please also add the chair. Docket 0850 will be assigned to the Committee of Housing and Community Development. We'll go on to docket 0851, Madam Clerk.
Docket 0851, Councillor Edwards offered the following order for an amendment to the Boston City Charter pursuant to General Laws, Chapter 43B, Section 10B.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councillor Edwards. Councillor Edwards, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. To my colleagues, today I am presenting the question to you as to how we should change how we function, how we're functioning as a body. The question for you, okay.
You're on mute. Okay.
Can you?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Again. You're muted again.
All right, I'll start again. To my colleagues, today I'm asking you to join me in fighting and changing the way we do business. What we learned recently in the back and forth that we had about our past budget is that we face great political pressure, and we also face great political risk based off of an annual vote that we take on the budget. But considering the amount of risk and the amount of pressure that we have as individuals and as lawmakers, we do not have the political power in order to implement or actually effectuate the change that is being asked of us. So I am asking my colleagues if they will join me in presenting this question to the voters as to whether our budgetary process is good enough. Does it really represent and does it really treat the decision that we're making on an annual basis as a $3 billion decision that it is? Is a yes or no or reduce enough? The fact is, we had this decision taken away from us as a body in 1909, when this became a strong mayor system. So if we're all going to question how we do business on all aspects of our city government, then I'm asking my colleagues, shouldn't this question also be put to the voters about how we allocate their money? The fact is, I think we know deep down inside, every single one of us thinks that we should be at the table earlier and discussing with the mayor about how $3 billion is going to impact our constituents. Goodness knows they are going to come to us if they don't get the things that they need. And goodness knows we don't have the ability to move that money in a way that truly reflects our district, if not the at-large city at this moment. I personally stated it when I was talking about my budget vote that we need to break this wheel. We genuinely need to stop this, what I think is a farce, about up, down, or reduction being systemic or being structural. We need to change how we do business. And what I'm proposing in this question is whether we should also be able to originate a budget, if we could also modify in whole or in part parts of the budget by reducing line item vetoes, by allocating funds to different departments, by allocating and having a participatory budgeting process, by clarifying certain budgetary measures, and also being able to impact the school budget. These are things I think that are asked of us, and we certainly are blamed if those things aren't happening for our districts. So why can't we be part of the real conversation to change that? I think if you want to ask yourselves why we should do this, think about how June 24th, when we voted for this, could have been differently. Think about that moment and the discussions that we had, every single one of us having a valued reason for the decision that we made to vote for or against the budget. And every single one of us knowing dollar for dollar what we felt was necessary and unnecessary, what was good, wasn't good enough. And every single one of us could have, if this was implemented, have had that conversation and pushed for it directly in the budget. We as a body could have organized and had that line and had that absolutes for ourselves in response to the current movement that we're in right now. We could have done that. And I believe we would have had a unanimous vote for that budget because we would have helped to design it. We would have helped to design it since April, and we would have been responsive, and we would have changed it, and we wouldn't have voted for something because we would have had the actual ability to change it. That is what I'm asking you to imagine. June 24th being a different time, every annual vote being a different time, because we're going to share the responsibility of a $3 billion decision with the mayor. The procedure would change naturally, and the mayor could propose, we would respond, the mayor could also adjust, and then we would ultimately have to vote. It is a back and forth conversation that I am proposing in this amendment. And I think it's necessary. Think about each one of your endeavors in your leadership, whether it's in the environment, Councilor O'Malley, whether it's dealing with police brutality, Councilor Campbell, whether it's dealing with the fact that an administration can eliminate an entire print shop, Councilor Baker. Every single one of those initiatives, every single point of our leadership, we could respond to differently because we would be able to allocate funds. If they want to get rid of a whole entire department and lay off people, we would respond, that is not acceptable. We wouldn't vote for that budget. That is the nimbleness that we will absolutely need when this budget and future budgets are impacted by the reduction in income that we're going to have. We need to be nimble. We need to be thinking about whose jobs are on the line, but also whose futures are on the line if they don't get the funding now. That is what I believe we are asked of anyway. And the best part about this procedure is part of our Constitution and part of our means of being able to not only ask this question of ourselves, to form the right question for the ballot, then to take that question directly to the voters. The same voters who wrote us thousands of emails asking us to do certain things, we're going to now ask them to be at the table. They will be able to make this decision ultimately. This is not in our hands completely. This is not an increase in taxes. This is simply, I am asking my colleagues to, step one, review this question and to form the right question that we think is appropriate for the ballot. We would then vote on it and decide that. After we do that, and we must do so within 6 months, that question then goes to our Attorney General. She will then look at the constitutionality of that, and she has 4 weeks to decide. After she makes her decision, I believe it will be constitutional, then it will go to the voters. That is the procedure that I'm asking simply that we participate in. I could not think of a better body of individuals or a better city council to do this with. I can't think of a better time to lead. We will be the first body in the Commonwealth to use this process under 43B, 10B to lead and to amend our Constitution, our charter. I can't think of anybody else I'd rather do this with. What I'm asking for you is to do it together, that we share this and we change how we do business in the city of Boston. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Councillor Edwards. The chair recognizes Councillor Bach. Councillor Bach, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank Councillor Edwards for her leadership here, and I just wanted to say in my capacity as the chair of Ways and Means that I wholeheartedly support this. I think that we were talking earlier in this meeting about ways that we could innovate in our budget process, and I think we can make a lot of progress there by starting the conversations earlier in the year and by exploring some of these participatory and zero-based budgeting mechanisms we've talked about. But the fundamental structure of our city government constrains the types of conversations we can have and the types of leverage that we have and the way that, as Councillor Edwards said, we can meet public demands. And I think that if this question were put to the voters and were to pass, it would be one of the most consequential things we could do for the city in terms of making sure that our budget processes going forward for decades, heck, centuries, right? Talking about a change that goes back to 1909 here, were like really inclusive of a greater variety of voices. And I think too that it was very hard on the 24th of June for the thing that put some of us, making different voting decisions to be, about our judgments about what the administration would do, what a broader economy would do, what our sort of prospects, what we were trading off in this zero-sum game, yes or no. And I think if we had been able to spend June talking about reallocations that we could actually make ourselves, it would have just been such a more fruitful conversation. So I just wanted to say in my capacity chairing this committee that Councillor Edwards' proposal really excites me. I know we'll have to look at the legal language and have the conversation. And I think there's also, I think we should acknowledge that there's a huge community of advocates that have been thinking a lot about charter reform in a host of ways for years now. And so this is a conversation bursting onto the scene on top of that existing conversation, which I know Councillor Edwards has really been part of from the beginning. But yeah, I'm excited about this. So I just wanted to say, count me in. Thanks.
Anon?
Thank you so much. You're adding your name, I assume.
Indeed, yes.
The chair recognizes Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Councillor Edwards, for your leadership here. And I absolutely agree with you that to meaningfully put forward reforms that we've all been pushing for, to have a more robust and effective budget process, right? To do it in partnership with our residents, particularly our district residents, for district councilors. The council needs more power. The council needs more tools. As council president, got to interact with a lot of council presidents from across the country, and they were just floored at the limitations of power that the council has to do meaningful things, including our appointments, meaningful appointments that do not go through the council. So charter reform has been a topic of discussion. I have participated in many. I see it as a long-term goal, though. And one that we should absolutely push. There are different ways in which to do it. Some is through the State House, this particular method. I still have some lingering questions on some of the legal pieces, but looking forward to this conversation and working in partnership. But in the short term, there's also, I think, things that we have to do to push this administration, given the limited power we have. So when I voted no on the school budget years ago, I remember saying that. It was extremely painful to sort of be the solo person out there voting no. But I said, this budget, the way of continuing to do our education in the city of Boston is not working for so many of our families who continue to not have access to good quality schools in certain neighborhoods in the city of Boston. And if this is the major tool that we have to let our voices be known as to certain things we just don't want to accept anymore. And I remember really that vote was just out of just fear, just a ton of frustration that even through all our hearings, through all of our conversations, through all of our advocacy, that we still can't get some of these systems to respond differently. We can't get responses to data requests. I mean, it's a struggle sometimes, and it shouldn't be, that using our budgetary tool and our vote is powerful in the short term to hopefully move an agenda. And I stand by my no vote in that I thought we had an opportunity to push for some more reforms there. But this long-term piece, critically important. I am absolutely looking forward to the conversation and the action steps necessary. I'll just add, it reminds me of the Community Preservation Act. I came onto the council, that was my first piece of legislation, major legislation, with Councillor Flaherty, who was here before when it failed. Now everyone's like, oh, it's so wonderful. We're getting millions of dollars for our communities. That was a hard time, so there's no guarantee that the voters will even see it our way, right? And so again, how can we think about all the short-term tools that will help us move things forward while also thinking about these long-term changes that absolutely must happen if our residents want us as their counselors to be the most effective we can be in advocating for their concerns. So looking forward to this. Madam President, absolutely add my name. And thank you for your leadership here. And thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Mejia. Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and I'm well aware that we have a 3 o'clock meeting, so I will be brief. But I just quickly wanted to just thank Councilor Edwards for her passionate declaration of what it is, what these times require and what is needed. I don't like being invited to the table with terms and conditions, and this is what it's going to look like in terms of my participation. I'm really committed to having the type of leadership that people expect when they put you in office, and I have had to come to terms with how limited my power is during this budget process. And I think that for me, it really felt somewhat transactional, and to have an opportunity to just react to a statement and not really feel engaged in the process. And yes, I understand and I do appreciate, because I've heard from a lot of folks that a lot of the things that I was advocating for during the public hearings actually made it onto the budget. And I do appreciate those efforts that were made on behalf of language access and food insecurity and more dollars into the Department of Public Health. I mean, I really do appreciate the Boston Public Health Commission. I appreciate everything that the mayor did to listen and at least satisfy some of the needs that we identified during our hearings. But I will have to say is that, you know, even participating in the countless hearings, I felt like it was robotic. You would show up, people would talk, and everything would sound really pretty, and then you'd have to go back and do a Google search and try to figure out. It was like the Da Vinci Code, just to try to get some answers oftentimes. And I think that, you know, we have a responsibility and an opportunity to really redesign how we function. And I think everybody talks about collaboration and everybody talks about how important it is to be heard, but when it's time to roll up your sleeves and really listen and do the work in the spirit of collaboration, it becomes a lot harder when you're limited with whatever little powers you have. And I think that it was a very frustrating experience for us as counselors, as well as the people who put us in office. And I think that if this is going to be the one thing that we are hired to do in order for us to do our jobs well, then we need to be able to have more power to really move the work forward. So I'm here for all of it. Councilor Edwards, I really do appreciate your leadership in this space and looking forward to joining you. So please sign me on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor O'Malley. Councilor O'Malley, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I wanted to commend the maker, the District Council from East Boston, ask that my name be added, and just briefly sort of offer a historic perspective on these important, but certainly initiatives that have some great precedents. It was about 25 years ago, the clerk will correct me because she was counselor at the time, I believe, where there was the last charter change, binding charter change for the governance of the school committee. Question 2, I believe it was, back in the mid-1990s. And then it was about 15 years before that, the early 80s, 1983, where residents of Boston voted to change the structure of our very body. Of course, it was 9 at large, going to 9 districts and 4 at large. So I bring up these 2 examples that have occurred in my lifetime to underscore the fact that a city charter, much like the Constitution, is a living, breathing document, and one that we should have these conversations and we should have these opportunities to weigh in and change. And I think using our most important role, which is financial oversight, financial stability for the city of Boston, to have a better opportunity to be an co-equal partner as a co-equal branch of government with the executive is a very, very sound one, and one that we ought to be not only exploring, but actually doing. So I just wanted to commend the maker again for her very successful day of some really important legislation. Ask that my name be added, and really looking forward to what the next steps are and how that is entailed. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much, Councilor O'Malley. Would anyone like to add their names? Madam Clerk, could you please add Councilor Flynn, Councilor Asabi George, Councilor Mejia? You already have Councilor O'Malley. Please also add Councilor Flaherty, Councilor Arroyo. Please, were you adding your name? Please add Councilor Campbell, and please also add the chair. And let me just say that I think this is a game changer. So I want to commend the maker. When she told me about it, that's what I told her. I think this is a game changer. I know we've been talking a lot about our form of government and how the charter, dictates how much power we have. But I'm a firm believer that we have as much power as we think we have. I like to quote Alice Walker, who says the most common way that people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. And if we know anything about this 2020 council, this council and this meeting alone can demonstrate that, again, what I said at the beginning of the meeting, that our work goes beyond a single vote. And we have demonstrated just in this meeting alone all of the ways that we are trying to deal with our structures in this city and systemic racism. And so I think this is an important conversation to have around our charter and how we can have a budget process that gives us much more flexibility. I think this is a great compliment to all of the other hearing orders that have been presented. So kudos to the maker and kudos to all of you for doing amazing work. As I said at the beginning, I am really grateful for the opportunity to work with each of you. So with that being said, docket 0851 will be referred to the Committee on Government Operations. We will try to move through the rest of our meeting quickly. We all know we have a meeting in 5 minutes, so let's continue on. Madam Clerk, we're on the personnel orders. If you could please read docket 0852.
Docket 0852, Councilor Janey for Councilor Mejia.
Councilor Mejia seeks suspension of the rules and passage of docket 0852. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Nay. The ayes have it. Docket 0852 has passed.
Docket Docket 0853, Councilor Janey for Councilor Wu.
Councilor Wu seeks suspension of the rules and passage of docket 0853. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Docket 0853 has passed. I am informed by the clerk that there are 3 late files. I believe they are all personnel orders. If people want to check their emails to see, but they're all personnel orders, and in the absence of objection, these matters will be added to the agenda. Councilor Asabi George, you have your hand raised. Was that? Okay.
I'm sorry, Madam President, that's to make a comment at the end of the meeting.
Sure, no worries. Okay, so no objections. These late file matters have been added. The first personnel order is being offered by Councilor Asabi George. Madam Clerk, could you please read it into the record?
Yes, Councilor Kim Janey for Councilor Asabi George.
Councilor Asabi George seeks suspension of the rules and passage of this late file matter. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it, and the late file matter has been passed. The next 2 late file matters are for me. One of them is for Shane, so let's make sure we get that done. Madam Clerk.
Councilor Kim Janey for Councilor Kim Janey.
The chair seeks suspension of the rules and passage of this late file matter. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and this late file matter has been passed. And now for the 3rd late file matter.
Councilor Kim Janey for Councilor Kim Janey.
The chair seeks suspension of the rules and passage of this late file matter. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and this late file matter has been passed. Would anyone like to remove an item from the green sheets? Okay, not seeing any hands raised, we will keep moving on. I do want to make mention, we have suspended the consent agenda during our remote work. Everyone knows the last 3 to 4 months, we have not been doing the consent agenda during the quarantine. And as we safely transition back into our physical spaces, I want to make sure that My colleagues can do resolutions and all of those types of things. So there will be regular office hours for my office, the president, if you need your signatures for your resolutions by our next meeting. So we will have regular office hours and we'll communicate what those are so that we can open up the consent agenda and people can do resolutions once again. So I will follow that up. I know folks miss being in the chamber. You know, we have this 3 o'clock briefing with Chief Brophy to discuss how we can safely move back into our space. I know everyone misses being in that space, especially our 4th honorary counselor, Mike, who I saw 2 weeks ago, and he says hi to everyone. So hopefully we will get our hearings and our meetings back in the chamber very soon. Now we will move on to announcements. I saw that Councilor Asabi George had her hand raised. Councilor Asabi George, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I request permission to just make a few comments.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam President. First, July is Black, Indigenous, People of Color Mental Health Month. And we'll be filing a resolution, myself and Councilor Campbell, later this month, formally declaring it so in the city of Boston. But I wanted to note it today. There are so many culturally specific stigmas around mental health, but people of color also face systemic racism when trying to access the mental health care system. I will talk about these barriers in more detail at our next council meeting, but I think it's important that we take every opportunity to uplift that we need more mental health care providers of color, more providers with different, from various ethnicities, but also with some significant linguistic skills. We also need to make sure that we have a thorough program available for anti-racism training for our white mental health care providers, and making sure just fundamentally that we appreciate everyone's mental health and that access to care is important. My second comment today is about I'm just absolutely appalled at the changes that ICE has made regarding the student exchange and visitor program. These changes, we know, especially here in Boston as a university town, as a college town, that these changes will leave so many of our students stranded, particularly if they are unable to safely return home, both their physical safety, but also their thinking about their health in relation to this pandemic and COVID-19. ICE's changes are unnecessary and damaging to our country, to our schools, most of all, and to our city, but most of all to our international students. These changes ignore the realities of being an international student and put them at the unnecessary risk for contracting COVID-19 or being detained and deported. I ask that our colleges make it as easy as possible for our international students who leave the U.S. to maintain and access their education. But what we really need is these rules to be reversed. We need federal action to countermand these unnecessary and cruel rule changes. We are in the midst of a pandemic, and we cannot sacrifice the freedom and dignity of our international students. And we cannot ask our colleges to bring everyone back in person to ensure our international students can stay. International students should be able to remain in the U.S. and go to school virtually if their school is so structured. These rule changes will only cause more harm, and they will protect no one in this pandemic. I stand with our international students today and ask that we as a body look into how the city of Boston can protect them and work to undo these rule changes. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Flynn. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I just want to inform the body that I conducted a meeting with South Boston residents along with Council Flaherty. We discussed fireworks in South Boston, and I was on a meeting last night with Councilor Mejia and with my colleagues as well. And you know, the at-large colleagues are doing a great job on the task force working with the mayor. But I just wanted to keep people posted. After that meeting last night, the very informative meeting hosted by Councilor Mejia, there was a tragic accident in South Boston where a little boy, 11 years old, fireworks hit him somehow, and his hand had to be amputated partially. So we continue talking about this issue, and the police are responding, but it's also critical that we continue working with community-based organizations, youth groups, seniors, veterans, other people are concerned about this issue, continuing to update people about the dangers of fireworks. They're having a terrible quality of life impact on so many, but especially our seniors, persons with disabilities, little kids, a lot of veterans with PTSD, even our pets. So I just want to highlight the incident last night, but also to acknowledge the work of Mayor Walsh and my at-large councilors that are doing great work on the task force, and we'll continue working closely with you on suggestions. So thank you. Thank you to everybody for giving me that opportunity.
Thank you so much, Councilor Flynn. The chair recognizes Councilor Edwards. Councilor Edwards, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I just, I had some names, but I can wait till next week. But I did want to correct or amend the record. I was trying to get a charger at the time where you were collecting signatures or co-sponsors for docket 0846, the zero budgeting. And I don't believe I'd like to be a co-sponsor, Madam President.
If you could add Councilor Edwards on the docket. Can you repeat the docket number, Councilor Edwards?
0846.
46?
Yeah.
And you're now listed in support as a co-sponsor.
Thank you very much.
Did you have an announcement?
No, I will wait till the following meeting for my announcement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Councilor Bach. Councilor Bach, you have the floor.
Can I just make a similar amendment? I think I didn't get onto the list as a co-sponsor on the no hate resolution. Which was docket
0844.
Yes.
So added, thank you.
And we have added your name, Councilor Bach.
Thank you so much.
Any other announcements? Well, thank you so much. I just want to also acknowledge that it's been a really difficult time in our city. Residents have been dealing with the compounded trauma of weeks and weeks and weeks of disruptive fireworks, of people dying from gun violence. We had a really rough week this past week. This is all during our COVID pandemic, which is still alive and real. There still is no cure and no vaccine, so we still need to be safe. And this is all happening while we are collectively grieving George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. And so just a reminder that it's important that we take care of ourselves and take care of each other, that we are more intentional on being kind and understanding with each other. It is a really difficult time for all of us in our city. And as we close out with memorials, we will be adding the names of those killed in our own city on behalf of the entire council. So with that said, let's move into our memorials. As we adjourn today's meeting, we will do so in memory of the following individuals. For Councilors Arroyo and Wu, Lieutenant Benny White. For Councilor Bach, Sergey Spivakowski. For Councilor Edwards, Josephine Ward and Angela Atenko. For Councilor Flaherty, Paul Flynn, Peggy Balder and Gina Cerullo. For Councilor Flynn, Toonie Lee. And on behalf of the entire council, Sean Bailey, Onel Colin, Felicity Coleman, Xavier Rico, Justin Kennedy, Rashawn Washington Clark, and Tyrese G. Wiley. A moment of silence. The chair moves that when the council adjourns today, it does so in memory of the aforementioned individuals. We are scheduled to meet again on Wednesday, July 29th at 12 noon. Hopefully we'll be in the chamber, but just in case we're not, viewers can definitely watch the meeting on YouTube by visiting boston.gov/city-council-TV. All the
July 15th, right? Not 20th.
July 29th is our next council meeting.
Oh, it is?
Yes.
Oh.
So let me finish with this. July 29th is our next council meeting. It will be at 12 noon, hopefully in the chamber, but just in case it's not, people can go to YouTube and watch at boston.gov/city-council-TV. July 15th is a break. Enjoy it. Mejia and all others.
Oh.
All those in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
See you guys in the chamber. Thank you so much. Enjoy the break.
Oh, I didn't know that. So now I know.